Hey, everybody.
Hi.
We're just going to let a few people join in, so we'll start in about 5 minutes. Okay, hey everybody. Thank you so much for joining us as usual. Really appreciate all the support. It's good to see everybody kind of early today. We have kind of a different presentation today. It's going to be very interesting. It's going to be very interesting. Not so much the general case study we've seen. Luis is actually going to talk about more steps on how you can get in real world experience and that kind of stuff. So a lot of the questions that we see from you guys are more relating to this kind of thing rather than like the case study. So we think that this should be a really interesting one. Also, Luis has compiled a guide for you guys. And so anybody who does the quiz at the end of the session today will be receiving one of those. We will just send it to you directly on your email. Let's see, Alia, can you talk about the quiz today?
Yes, it'll be at the end of the session. So pretty much same thing. As long as you pass, you get the certificate.
Awesome. And the chat we'll be keeping an eye on. We'll be relaying your questions to Luis as he goes, or maybe at the end during the Q&A. So feel free to be as active as you like to be. I'll be watching that and then recording everything you guys have to say. But all right, Luis, I think that's everything. Whenever you're ready, man, you can go and take over.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me this morning here in California, which is where I'm currently practicing medicine. As stated, my name is Luis Rivera. You all can call me Junior. I'm currently a family medicine physician assistant practicing in the Central Valley here in California. But without further ado, one thing I like to mention is I love to present. So today is definitely a great day for me, despite it being Sunday. All right, so let's see, I'm going to share my screen with you all and get going. Share. All right, so please, if you have any questions, just put it in that chat section in the YouTube and I'll get to it. And it doesn't matter if you interrupt what I'm saying at the time, because I'd rather go over those questions when it's applicable and in the context that I'm presenting in order to be able to answer your question and make sure that you are confident in the response. So a concise guide to everything PA, getting accepted, excelling, and becoming employed. So I spent a disproportionate amount of time covering basically my way of getting accepted into PA school. Right, there's a variety of different ways, but I do mentor a lot of individuals and help them get into PA school. And this is what I've learned to work for them. That's a little bit unorthodox. And then we'll cover a little bit about, of course, PA school, what to expect, and then a couple of tips and tricks becoming employed and what to look at in your contract. So things that you guys can start thinking about even now. And then also I would apply that type of framework to my current employment and see how it kind of stacks up. Okay. All right, so this is my application statistics. I really had to dig deep for this. I'm only about maybe 6 months out from graduating and have taken my pants. So I was able to find these statistics, but first and foremost, my degree, I double majored in dietetics, which is nutrition, and kinesiology, and I had a minor in psychology. My patient care experience is around 600 hours, and I bet many of you have more patient care experience than I do, and there's definitely a reason for that. And part of it is that I actually ended up getting into PA school within 6 months of graduating from my undergrad. And throughout the period of time when I was in undergrad, I did a lot of healthcare experience hours, which we can get into detail. But that amounted to about 3,000 hours. Shadowing was about 40 hours with actually just one physician assistant. And then my science GPA was 3.56 and my cumulative GPA was 3.74. One thing I want to mention, some of these statistics, you may think, oh my goodness, my science GPA, my cumulative GPA is not as high. One thing that I always advocate for students that I mentor is that as long as you get your foot in the door past that 3.0 minimum GPA, really you have a room to work with. And one of the things I work with when it comes to students is understanding what they consider their disadvantage or their weakness and leveraging that to actually make that their strength in the application, in addition to the strengths that, of course, look like strengths on paper as well. So just a little bit more about my background. I attended ATSU School of Osteopathic Medicine in Mesa, Arizona, which was 26 months, 14 months spent in the classroom, 12 months clinical. ATSU is a little bit unique in that they place their students around the country in community health centers. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. Particularly, my clinical rotations was spent in Central California, where I'm currently at Family Healthcare Network. So really our rotations are split up into family medicine, women's health, pediatric surgery, emergency medicine. I'm sure you're familiar with this aspect of clinical rotations, but you really cover each division or section of medicine, usually at 6 weeks at a time. And then we go into end of rotation exams, and then we move on with or practice. So currently practicing family medicine at Family Healthcare Network, as I mentioned earlier. So one thing that I do, and one of the reasons why I love talking so much just in general, but also about this topic, and I think that I could provide valuable insight for you, is that I mentor around 200 pre-PA students in terms of just providing them insight, providing them advice in terms of how to apply to PA programs, what to look for, common pitfalls. But one of the things I love to do the most is be able to do mock interviews with individuals completely free, no stipulation to that. And I'll go into that in my philosophy in just a moment. But to be able to identify, once again, what they think their weaknesses, what they think their strengths are, and be able to make a strong candidate out of their current experiences. Oftentimes, I have found that we want to make pre-PA students go into this cookie cutter format or cookie cutter template. And the reality is that it just doesn't work out that way. For every application that a PA program sees, there needs to be a difference in terms of how you present yourself and how you interpret your current experiences, which kind of goes into my philosophy. I'm very much a believer that as a PA officially, we should not be the obstacle. PAC should not be the obstacle, another obstacle for pre-PA students. That's why many of the services that I offer, many of the resources I offer is completely free, because my goal is to get everybody into PA school, especially those individuals who think that they don't have what it takes, or that perhaps they have a GPA that's too low. There's a lot of wiggle room there, and it's something that I really, really enjoy exploring and leveraging for them. So really my objective with this presentation overall is to keep it short and sweet and very concise and practical. There's no, this is theoretically what you should do, and then go find a way to do it. I actually provide scripts, I provide formats for you to follow and obviously modify as you wish to be able to get the outcome that you want. And I've been able to identify the common levers that provide the highest yield along your path to becoming a physician assistant. My goal ultimately is not necessarily to give you the opportunity, just hand it to you on a plate, but rather to teach you how to find them for yourself, and then ideally have you teach those around you how to do the exact same thing. So getting accepted is really that first section of the presentation. This is what I hope is most applicable to all of you and provides the biggest bang for your buck. Really, it's broken down into gaining experience, seeking mentorship, Caspa, letters of recommendation, personal statement, supplemental essays, and interviews as well. And interviews is what I specialize in, and I have unique advice that I like to give you all, hopefully that can help calm your nerves and be the ultimate you when you have that opportunity into the future. So gaining experience, this is my perspective. Ideally, you want to try gaining patient care experience during your college undergrad experience, right? And the way that you can do this is by utilizing academic advisors. Now, I know that sometimes we don't have the best academic advisors, or you have to switch constantly. So one of my recommendations is actually to find an academic advisor and stick with him or her and really befriend them. And we'll get to really why that's important in the future. But ideally, you want to use your academic advisors to find training within your own curriculum, such as EMT, that's part of your course curriculum, something that you're already going to pay for with your loans or out of pocket, to be able to get that experience and then be able to apply for those PCE or patient care experience employment opportunities that happen to be a little bit more flexible and complement your current course curriculum. Otherwise, what is a common route that I also recommend individuals to take is to utilize the healthcare experience and also their volunteer experience. So internships or any type of initiative on campus, especially at universities, is very, very good for this. Usually the reason why I say that healthcare experience and volunteer experience is a little bit more ideal is because it's more flexible and you're able to go to it on a Saturday or on a Sunday, and it's not really a 9 to 5, or it's not really a set schedule that you have to attend to throughout your course curriculum. But the point being that you really want to get that experience throughout, or start getting that experience throughout your 4 years. And with the handout that I will give all those who are listening today, it kind of breaks down exactly how and what time to really implement these phases of your experience. For example, I wouldn't necessarily recommend anybody to get patient care experience or find an employment opportunity to get patient care experience within their first year of undergrad, because a lot needs to be learned throughout that first year, and it's hard enough to be able to do well in classes. Usually it's something that I recommend individuals do sometime within their second year. And then during the summer prior to their second year, they try getting that clinical or that patient care experience training, such as training for an EMT or a phlebotomist or a certified nursing assistant as well. And I would recommend that as well with healthcare and volunteer experience, because the point being that first year you want to just focus on academics, understand what works well for you, and then you can start adding in bits and pieces as you wish throughout the second and third and fourth. And for me, it was fifth year because I was a double major. And also something to consider that even if none of this works and you don't get patient care experience hours within your undergrad, that's totally okay. If you really think about it, if you work 40 hours per week within 1 year, you can get 2,000 hours, which is fairly competitive. And I know that probably is not new information to you, but just something that I like to remind you that if you don't meet these, ideals or goals, you're still okay going onward. Utilize research, but don't fall into a research trap. This is something that's very common in my university, or really most universities, specifically universities, do research on campus with various professors, even within your major field of interest. I would recommend to do that sparingly. Yes, get your hours in research because it is very impactful, and you learn a lot, especially your way of thinking through things. Without a doubt, I had a good amount of years of research, but I have had the pleasure of looking at various resumes. I mean, countless resumes in terms of just information or background that students are going to be using for their application in the future for PA school. And sometimes all I see is research. And it's really because if you befriend a professor, or even if you're in a class with a professor who does research, he or she often provides those opportunities within the class for the students to take up on. And yes, you're going to have initiative, you want to be proactive, you want to get that experience, but don't spend your entire time getting research if you can also be using that time to get healthcare experience, volunteer experience, and or patient care experience hours. So seeking mentorship, this is one of those levers that I talk about. If you're able to manage this, you're able to have a high yield with, let's say, little effort. Although it does take a lot of effort, but relative to the yield that you return, it's very minimal. So I'm very big on basically teaching individuals how to reach out to anybody. It doesn't matter their field of specialty, it doesn't matter if they're in medicine. For example, what I'm about to cover with you, I've used to, of course, connect with physician assistants, MDs, DOs, NPs, but also individuals in the financial industry, individuals in the real estate industry. I mean, with very little, with no money, actually. It was more so just a mentorship, learn from that individual and provide some type of value that doesn't necessarily have to be monetary. So really take these to heart and try implementing them. And once again, I will provide you guys with the script on exactly how to do that. So first, you want to consider the connections already made. For example, when I sought my first physician assistant to shadow, at that time I was working in sports nutrition within Oregon State University, which is the university I attended and graduated from. At that time, we also had a clinic that many of the athletes that we were working with went to for any type of sports injuries. Well, I thought, well, I know the sports nutritionist. I'm sure that individual knows the APA or some type of medical provider in that clinic, because we have to work with them in order to provide adequate nutrition for athletes. So why don't I see if I can get myself through this individual into this opportunity to shadow? And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. One thing I recommend individuals to do if they don't have those connections already made, and one thing I want to mention, you don't have to have the connection of having a sports nutritionist. If you have a primary care provider, a primary care physician, which I also did this, I basically had an appointment. Honest to goodness, it was actually for an actual medical concern. It wasn't just made up to talk to that individual, although, you can make the decision for yourself. But I asked that individual, who I knew was working with 2 PAs, if I can shadow the PAs that he works with. And sure enough, I had to go through the legal documentation, the HIPAA documentation. But after that period of time, I was able to shadow both of these physician assistants, which were in family medicine. But if this does not work for you, one thing I recommend is to just do a general Google search of clinics within your area. Usually the smaller, the better. And to be able to basically contact them, which I'll follow up with the script, and being able to prevent that or create that opportunity for mentorship. Usually, if you go to their webpage, you can find basically contact information to get yourself started through the employment page or employment hotline or employment resource. And usually they direct you to the appropriate channels in order to get in contact with some type of provider, or at least their medical assistant or secretary to get the ball rolling. So just a general overview of the scripts to come. Ask to interview the provider, right? This isn't ask for a mentorship opportunity. It's to ask to interview the provider, which is very important differentiation there. And then when you do interview him or her, you want to ask anyone questions. Throughout that period of time, you also want to reveal information about yourself. And you want to ask to continue learning from that provider in some capacity. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be next to them 24/7. It can mean a simple email or simple text if you're at that level with them, throughout the month. And then you want to slowly transition that to shadowing mentorship opportunities and good letters of recommendation. A common pitfall that I see is that as pre-PA students, we're so eager to try getting that experience that we view other medical providers as just that, as experience and as ours. You have to remember, which I know we all know this, that we are human and we thrive on developing those relationships. And so do you. If you develop a relationship with a provider, you'll find that, yes, you'll get the shadowing and mentorship experience, but you'll also get good letters of recommendation because they're going to know you very well. You're going to be their friend, or at least be somebody who they know very well or know academically or professionally very well. So it's not just a matter of hours anymore, guys. And this is the hardest part, or the hardest pill to swallow, because it takes time. But what I like to think of is that right now during COVID, the opportunities are diminishing, or they're very low to begin with. Now, this is the perfect opportunity to implement this and develop that relationship through email, through various phone calls. And then by the time that, more opportunities open up into the future, that is when you can take advantage of, or utilize rather than take advantage, those connections that you've made. And this is obviously contrary to popular belief, because most individuals think, okay, once opportunities start developing, once opportunities start to increase, that's when I'm going to take action. Well, you're not alone. 9 times out of 10 individuals are thinking that. And if you have already developed a strong connection with the provider, because you put in the time and effort and energy, you're more likely to get that opportunity than those individuals who are waiting for the green light. Okay, so this is a reaching out script. So the individuals that I mentor, one of the hardest things to really develop is how to really get in contact with somebody, or what to say when you do get in contact with somebody, right? We can all do a general Google research. We can all call somebody, right? But sometimes it's very difficult to understand what to say. So this is a general script. I'll read through it very quickly. Hi, my name is, I'm currently a student and I'm studying to become a physician assistant who gives back to his or her community. I know things are very chaotic right now and I don't want this phone call to burden you, but is there a physician assistant whose email I can have to contact and learn more about the important work they do? If there's a long pause or there's a long hesitation, you can say, if this isn't the best time, I can contact you again next week. Granted, you can modify this, but this is a general structure of what I would suggest you do. And email is often better than the phone, because as a provider right now, the time that we have throughout the day is slim. So to be able to field a question on the phone and perhaps take a good amount of time is much less likely to happen than responding to an email throughout the day. Okay, so this kind of goes into detail of the tips that I reviewed just previously. So once again, you want to ask for an interview for the potential mentor. And during that time, you want to ask what they do and why they do it. And then you want to find one thing you can do for that individual after the interview without asking that person. But you can also ask at the end of the interview if there's anything you can do to continue learning from them, because their expertise, knowledge, and experience is extremely valuable for you. And you want to give them basically a reason why. Why do you want to continue learning from them? Not just, oh, I want to have somebody to contact that perhaps can give me a letter of recommendation in the future. So then the fourth thing you can do is, if they say yes, make sure to follow up the next day thanking them, even if they say no. And you want to make sure to keep in touch with them at least once every month or once every 2 months at the bare minimum, by providing updates about what you're doing, your work and ambitions, and kind of paralleling that with what you know of them and what they're doing in that current state. And in between this time, preferably within 1 month of the interview, make good on what you said you would do as an action item for yourself without the individual knowing. this is something that you should really get into the habit of doing every time you reach out to somebody. And that's, once again, whether it's in the medical field, financial industry, real estate industry, as I have implemented it and utilized it and benefited from it. Okay. So this is also another follow-up script, usually through email, that you can also implement following an interview. So, hi, I hope all is well with you. The reason I'm contacting you today is because, given the reason, I remember last time we met, talked, you expressed something, pick something out of the interview or conversation you had with that individual. It is for this reason I'm asking for really what your ask is, what your request is or favor, and what do you want advice on. So I understand if you are busy and unable to respond to this email. I appreciate your time and consideration. This is coming from experience, both of what I have realized works, but also the emails that I get constantly throughout the day. So this is something that will kind of help frame your request, but not just frame it. I mean, studies have shown, and I'm not sure, I forget what book it's from, but if you give a reason behind what you're doing, people are more likely to respond. I think the research had to do with basically cutting in front of line of an individual to print papers. And if an individual cut in front of the other person without saying anything, just to print their papers, the individual who was cut off would be very upset. But if the individual who cut the other person off gave them a reason why, they were much more willing and open to allow the individual to do it, even if the reason why had nothing to do with printing papers. This is the thought process behind this particular email script, and any given request that you have, give a reason why. Of course, as medical providers and as clinicians, we want to have a reason that's applicable to our own experience and expertise. So if you provide that there, you'll be surprised with the yield or the amount of yeses that you get from this type of contact. So shadowing experience. With shadowing experience, some things that I recommend before shadowing, and granted, this is more so in the era of shadowing in person, but a little modification towards the bottom there for you when it comes to virtual. Think about the ideal attributes you want included in your letter of recommendation, which is LOR. Display said attributes in your actions and questions. Create your own assignment related to provider specialty. This is why I was able to manage getting a low amount of shadowing hours, but be able to leverage that, because I understood that I may not have many opportunities to get shadowing experience within the period of time that I was planning to graduate from undergrad and apply to my PA programs. So I knew that I had to make the best use of it. And so I told myself, if this individual was to write a letter recommendation for me several months down the road, with me investing my time, effort, to be able to understand what they're doing within their profession, also let them know what I'm doing and what my passion and mission statement is, how am I going to be able to maximize that? And that was really a matter of understanding what attributes I wanted to be described in my personal state or in my letter recommendation, and then being able to display that, of course, throughout the shadowing experience. And even one step further, I wanted to basically create a distinction. I wanted to distinguish myself from other students that perhaps had shadowed this individual and really stand out like, wow, this individual is unlike others. And so for me, that was creating an own assignment related to the provider specialty. So I ended up looking at deltoid tears, various deltoid tears, and asked the provider I was working with if I was to research these different types of deltoid tears and present that to him, would he be able to give me some feedback and allow me to learn more about this aspect of the medicine that you practice? And of course, he was on board. He loved it. And I think it was something that he actually wanted to implement from those who shadowed him thereafter. So similarly, when it comes to virtual shadowing edition, really you want to contact the individual presenting or the provider presenting. So AKA in this case, it's me. And you really use that creating mentorship script and being able to ask them questions about what they do, why they're doing it, reveal some information about yourself, and then follow up with them with more learning opportunities, but always providing value in return. Okay, and if at any moment you want me guys to stop and to address something that doesn't really make sense, I know I'm going kind of quick through this, you just let me know. Okay.
No, you're perfect, Liz. Everything is great.
Okay.
We have had a few questions, but
Sure.
they're more general, so I'll just wait until your Q&A at the end so I don't have to interrupt you.
Sounds good.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so Caspa, one of the biggest recommendations I have for students is to create a Caspa account. Even if you aren't planning to apply this year, the next year, just create a Caspa account. Really, because it helps to understand how to document your current experiences. If you think about it, right now you're at point A, right? In time. When you graduate and when you apply to PA programs, or when you apply to PA programs, whether you graduated or not, right? Perhaps you're post-grad already. That's going to be your point B. In order to understand your path to point B, you need to know what point B is, exactly what it requires from you. Oftentimes, I discuss and talk with individuals who tell me, Junior, I want to apply. What do I do first? I say, go into Caspa, look at what it requires information and how they want you to present that information, submit that information. And then they're like, oh my goodness, I think I have 1,000 hours of healthcare experience, but I'm not sure if I have patient care experience. I'm not sure if that qualifies as patient care experience. I'm not sure how many hours and so on and so forth. I'm sure that you have been in this position or you at least know of somebody who is in this position currently. This could have been prevented, right? And granted, we can always work through it together, but this could have been prevented if in the beginning of your journey, you understood exactly what was going to be required of you. The last thing you want to do is to be an outstanding applicant and then miss a deadline because you're trying to figure out how to document your information, how to submit it, or you overlook something that's very important in the application process because you were rushed to get it completed before the deadline, right? One thing to remember, that Caspa carries over your information from year to year, so long as you keep the same account. Apart from that, if you're very worried or you don't trust that type of technology, then you can always put it in some type of word processing software and keep it that way as well. But if anything, at least you understand how to document your experiences by exploring Caspa and exploring what type of information they require per experience. Talking about experience, one of the common pitfalls I see is just that, adding the experiences and basically how to describe them. We'll go into detail exactly what I mean by that, and I'll provide you good examples and do's and don'ts. But commonly, I see individuals put paragraph explanations for their experiences because they think, well, my personal statements like this, my supplemental essays like this, those questions I've responded to pertinent to the programs like this. Why not continue doing that? Well, you have to understand that a lot of information that you usually repeat in that text, in that section, is information you have already included some other location within the application, so you don't need to include it again. Oftentimes, you have to remember that if you were the individual on the other side reviewing this application, how many applications would you have reviewed by that time? How many paragraphs and distinguishing markers would you have to read through and type of distinguish while comprehending that information, and how burdensome can I get over a period of time? That's why I always suggest to do bullet points or to do little indicators that indicate where your next sentence starts off at, but do single sentences rather than paragraph format. Because once again, you don't want to repeat information. This kind of goes into how I view the Caspa application, which I think is a little bit different than how most individuals view it. For example, oftentimes we think our personal statement is the only thing that, like, it's the crown jewel. It's the thing that's going to get us into PA school. And I won't argue about that with you. But what I will mention is that I look at the Caspa application into 3 sections. The personal experiences you have to put in, which breaks down the concrete things that you did, the responsibilities you did that you're saying is patient care experience or you're saying is healthcare experience. Then you have your personal statement, and then you have your letters of recommendation. So those 3 sections, right? Those 3 sections. Ideally, you don't want to repeat yourself in those 3 sections. And if you're to take a couple of steps back and look at that application, you want to ask yourself, how do those 3 sections form an impression of me as a applicant, right? So when I mention that is that you don't want to repeat information. Granted, you will repeat some information or overlap some information between those 3 sections, but your goal is not to repeat yourself over and over again, and not to really own in on just one particular skill that you've had across their personal statement, your personal experiences, and your letter of recommendation. And we'll get into how to utilize the letters of recommendation to maximize both your personal statement and then also your personal experiences which you're inputting. But a large part of that goes back to don't repeat information, don't write it in paragraph form when you input your experiences. So other considerations, always include awards, internships and honor roll as awards, because you had to apply for it. Presumably other individuals wanted to do it or would like to do it, which is an award if you were given that opportunity. Transfer credits should also be from the original institution. Even if you transfer from community college into a university, you still need to indicate that you receive those credits at that community college, and make sure to include that transcript along with it. This is your time to really brag about yourself. And I don't say that necessarily comically either. The worst thing that can happen in this case, if you include an award, like an internship, and somebody says like, what the heck, that's not an award, right? Whoever looks at your application, they just disregard it. The best thing can happen though, is that they include it and they think, oh my goodness, this individual is amazing. They're both doing this, which is included in the personal statement, which is different than their personal experience, which is also different than the letter of recommendation, right? But it gives a strong impression of what this individual is as a candidate. But on top of that, they also had this internship. They've also gotten honorable. It just makes you stand out much more than the other individual and applicant who's applying to that program. So this is my breakdown of basically how to go through these Caspa experiences, inputting experiences. I won't really go into the do's and don'ts because I trust that you'll have this information sent to you. But I mean, pretty self-explanatory. I give you a bad example, essentially of putting into paragraph form, and then I give you a good example, basically splicing it out and making it much more concise of a presentation. I think that's, yeah, and just the overall takeaway with this is just make sure not to repeat yourself substantially. There'll be some overlap, of course, but not to repeat yourself with the information you already provided before this particular section of inputting responsibilities and in other locations as well. Okay, so the second important thing that I recommend any individual complete or do is basically create an Excel document of the programs that they're interested in applying to, right? And so this is pretty straightforward, presumably, that you have on your X column, you have basically the eligibility criteria apart from just the school name across the X column, and then across the Y, you also have the school name. I recommend you do this despite there being programs, resources, services that perhaps you even paid for that provides you this document. I say that because it's one thing to get this document already made for you, just as it is one thing for me to give you an opportunity, but it's another thing for you to create that opportunity. It's another thing for you to create an Excel document like this one as well, because this is going to be the backbone to your stress or your preparation. If you don't do this, I have found out that students are extremely overwhelmed. They tell me there are so many programs, so many requirements. I don't know what to do. I don't know what program to apply to. And these are often the students that also miss the deadline to a program they really wanted to apply to, and they waited the entire year to apply to. So I tell them, you need to find a concise way of categorizing all this information with important information in order to be able to understand when these deadlines are, whether or not they're rolling a mission, how many patient care experience hours do they require, where are your credentials or credits in your institution in comparison to what they're requiring. So I recommend for anybody to do this as one of the founding steps of their path to becoming a PA, or perhaps even if you haven't done it yet, please do it, especially on your own, to be able to understand when the deadlines are and when other pieces are set into play that are important for the application process. So some things you can includes your GPA, or GPA requirement, rolling admission, interview offer, deadline, location, patient care experience, healthcare experience, and shadowing hours or ascending prerequisites. Perhaps you know what rolling admission is. One thing I always bring that up, or one reason I always bring that up, is because this could be a difference in terms of how competitive you are in the program. Essentially, the earlier you apply within the application cycle for that program, once they start accepting applications, the more seats they have to offer individuals who are applying. This is to say that maybe you have a program that has 70 seats available. If you submit your application shortly thereafter their cycle opens, then your application will be reviewed as first come, first serve, and there'll be more seats, let's say 65 or 60 seats available to offer you, versus if you waited to the last minute, you're going to have maybe 5 seats. And of course, that provides you less opportunities to get accepted into that program, especially if it's one of your dreams. So going into letters of recommendation, as I mentioned earlier, so far we've covered the personal experiences, then also how to select programs. Now going to letters of recommendation, and of course we'll get into personal statement, which I think you guys will really like because I provide also a script and outline of what I have found to be the most impactful way of writing. First tip when it comes to letters of recommendation is to stay in contact with your past contacts, which seems simple enough, but I bet you there are individuals in your life that you're going to need for your application that you do not talk to on a regular basis, or at least on a monthly basis. These are the individuals that you really need to hone in on, because they're the individuals who may write your letters of recommendation, or they're going to be individuals that you're going to have to use as a contact person. And how awkward is it? And I've been there, to call this person and say, hey, I worked with you 3 years ago. I'm saying that I'm doing 300 healthcare experience hours on my application. It's very important to me, by the way. Can you vouch for that? And in most cases, let's be honest, unless they don't like you for whatever reason, they're going to vouch for you. But you want to be confident, because if you have some type of faculty member from the program you're applying to contact, because you have to provide this contact information of those hours you've accumulated, and they have a hard time remembering who you are, that is not going to look good. And so this is why it's so important to keep in contact with individuals using any one of the scripts I provided up to this point. So this includes supervisors, professors, medical professionals. You at least want to reach out to them every 2 months, but if you reach out to them once every month, that's going to be phenomenal as well. And once again, you want to provide information that's valuable to them and what they're doing. You also want to know what they're doing, but you also want to provide insight of what you're doing. And we'll kind of go into detail of exactly how to do that, because once again, I provide you a script. Because like I mentioned, this isn't just theoretical. I've done this countless times, and I've had individuals do this countless times to develop networks that are actually going to benefit them genuinely. Okay, so how to use letters of recommendation, not to say so much like contacting, but this is kind of a unique way of looking at letters of recommendation. And I've had students tell me like, whoa, I never thought you can use it in such a way. So let's get started with it. First and foremost, you want to think about 3 to 5 potential letters of recommendation, which basically means contact individuals, contact persons, right? Caspa has requirements, or programs have requirements of exactly what that means. Do you need your supervisor, some type of science professor, and some type of medical provider? Sometimes it's specialized or specific in saying a PA, but so usually it's MD, DO, NP, and PA. So then you want to, let's say, and I'll go into example with this. Let's say you have an individual that you're thinking or considering as a contact person or letter recommendation. Underneath that individual, you want to think about strengths and experiences you've accumulated or have had with that individual, right? From there, you want to ask yourself, what impression does this give about me, right? Those strengths and experiences. And that individual was able to talk about me in a letter of recommendation about these experiences and strengths that I've exemplified within my time with him or her. What would it say about me? And how does this add, take away, or repeat other parts of my application, right? So ideally, you want a kind of a perfect split where it kind of repeats some information and it also adds more information about you as an applicant. And it kind of goes back into breaking letters of recommendation, your personal statement, and your personal experiences into 3 separate categories that when I take a couple steps back and look at your application, it says something about you as a whole individual, not just your personal statement, not just your personal experiences, and not just your letters of recommendation. And then you ideally select the letter of recommendation that adds the most to your application without repeating too much information, obviously taking anything away from your application. So this is how you go about basically facilitating that. You contact letter recommendation or contact person and ask if they're willing to write about your experiences, those experiences you laid out earlier, the strength and experiences you accumulated with that individual. Sometimes, especially if you have not kept in contact with this individual, which is why it's always important to stay in contact with those that you believe, well, you've enjoyed experiencing or spending time with, but also you believe will help you to get into PA school. You can also include a summary of things you've completed with him or her, just as a refresher. You can also schedule a time, like a Zoom session, to just talk about what you're currently doing and what you hope that they could include in your letter of recommendation. Now you may think, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this. Well, there's something to be said about that. You're not necessarily allowed to see your letter of recommendation afterwards and provide edits to it before you submit it, right? That's something that you actually have to indicate on Caspa that you're not going to do, that you haven't seen the letter of recommendation prior to it being submitted, right? Or you haven't modified it yourself. That's kind of like the trust system or honor system. But nothing's to be said about genuinely, honestly thinking about the experiences you have with this individual and trying to own in on that, because you understand that's something that's lacking in your personal statement, but that's something that's lacking then in your personal experiences. Or perhaps in your personal experiences, that section we covered earlier, you say, I completed blood pressure for 1,000 patients across X amount of days, right? And you need credibility in terms of the quality of blood pressure readings, right? This is a very simple task here that we're using as the example, but you need credibility. Maybe you want the individual, the supervisor that you're also getting a letter of recommendation from, who oversaw you do these blood pressure readings, to add that credibility. So that's something that you are within your own right, because you actually did those things. You're not making this up, to ask nicely the letter the contact for the letter of recommendation to include in their letter of recommendation for you. Oftentimes they'll be like, of course, I will include that, but I'll also include this because I think that this is something that you exemplified. And then you're like, oh my goodness, I never even thought about that. But because we had this conversation, you were able to think about that and add it into that overall impression of you as an applicant. So this is an example, right? Joe Doe, pretty sure it's supposed to be John Doe, but I'm going with it. PAC, MPH, supervised me splinting patients, gave me closing responsibilities, allowed me to practice history taking, and made me responsible of coordinating community events or an event. So this is the experiences or strengths or responsibilities I have with this individual. This is what I want Joe Doe to talk about in another recommendation. If this adds to my overall impression as an applicant and candidate for a program, I want to follow up with Joe Doe and ask, can he write this letter of recommendation? Does he mind owning in some part of that letter of recommendation on these things that I believe were most impactful for me when it came to having an experience with him? All right, so professors are usually the hardest to get in contact with, because typically when you're done with the class, and usually it's a difficult class, right? Because it's science-based classes, you're like, I don't want to talk to that individual ever again in my life. That was such a terrible experience. I did well, hopefully, but I'm okay with that contacting that individual. This script is meant exactly for that, not to say that their class was terrible, it was very difficult, but just to get in contact with somebody while remembering what they taught you and how you implemented it in your life. And if you see a general theme, I'm very good at being personable and interpersonal and teaching interpersonal skills to some of the students that I work with, in the sense that it's not just a matter of asking for what you want, right? Because you may get what you want by just saying, I want a letter of recommendation. But the quality in that letter of recommendation will be vastly different than an individual who comes and reaches out to me and says, hey, I remember when you taught me this. And I remember when you told me you really valued this. Those two things are things that have always played a role in the work that I'm doing to this date. For that reason, I would like to see if I could get in contact with you for you potentially can write me a letter of recommendation. That to me stands out like, oh my goodness, this person cared what I was talking about. They listened to it. It was impactful enough for them to come back to me. And I'm okay and open to the opportunity, despite the time difference that we may have had in not contacting one another. This is totally different than an individual who comes to me and says, hey, write me a letter of recommendation, or can you write me a letter of recommendation? I was in your class in like 2010, right? I'm like, no, I don't know you. You don't say anything about what I taught you at that period of time. I don't know, there's no context for your question. And you'll be surprised, you're like, oh my goodness, who would do that? Just look at some of the emails you've sent before in the past. I'm guilty of this as well. Before I knew this was very effective, before I learned about this and implemented it and had it implemented on me, I sent out some pretty outrageous emails that I'm not going to include here because it'd be too embarrassing and I'll lose all my credibility. So common pitfalls, personal statement. Oof, personal statement is where the money is made, figuratively, because I don't charge anything, and obviously we don't get paid anything as pre-PA students going into PA school. So common pitfalls on the unbolded terms basically are the things that you don't want to do or things that I've seen done. So too structured and too academic. Opposing should be more of a narrative. Too professional and too serious. You should elicit an emotional response. Too repetitive. Needs to add needs to add to your application and tell the why. And too cliche. Acknowledge similarities, but explain the difference. So we've been in school arguably for a long period of time, getting into PA school before we applied to PA school, right? So we think this is a very professional institution. This is a very, very prestigious program. I'm going to write very academic, as I have been taught throughout the entirety of my life. That to me is very boring, and it's going to be very boring and fit into a cookie cutter template that I always argue individuals not to fall victim to. It needs to be a narrative, meaning that you need to have a beginning, you need to have a middle, and you need to have an end. When I read your personal statement, there needs to be a narrative there that tells me why you want to become a physician assistant, not just that you meet these metrics, not just that you are like every other student who applied to the program, and that's why you should become a PA through this program. With that being said, it needs to elicit an emotional response. Let's be honest, most of us are many people aren't that comfortable talking about their emotions, let alone on a piece of document to a stranger, right? And I'm somewhat doing this on presentation, right? I can't see any one of you and I'm talking to you about this conversation, right? And it's a little bit uncomfortable, but we are human. Once again, just as a reminder, if you are to, the way that we process information, right? The way that we process information is that if we're inundated with information that's just very repetitive, it's going to go in through one ear and out the other one, not anatomically speaking, but figuratively, right? If there's an emotional response, there's, and I don't remember the particular part of it, you may think the amygdala, but there's another part of it that allows us to focus more on that emotional response because we're keen to that. It's distinguishing itself from just the boredom, monotone topics that are usually talked about in personal statement. I'm more keen to focus on that personal statement that elicits an emotional response than if it did not, right? So that's one of the things I really teach students is how to open up, how to articulate their thoughts in their personal statement in a way that creates an emotional response and gets some attention. And believe me, this is one of the strongest ways that I help individuals because often we think we need to be too professional. We're very uncomfortable sharing our emotions on paper. And even if we're a very emotional person in general, it's very difficult to articulate those thoughts on paper. And that's really one of my fortes. Too repetitive. This is kind of a general theme that we've talked about up to this point. Too cliche. So often I see individuals say, well, Junior, I don't want to talk about a medical life-threatening event that happened in my life, right? Because I know that everyone's going to talk about that, right? I see where they're coming from, but it's in your interpretation, in your acknowledgement of that, let's say in this case, that medical concern, right? So yes, if you go into the medical concern and say, I had this life-threatening event, and that's the moment I wanted to become a PA, that's going to be pretty played out, right? Unfortunately, I'm not saying it's not impactful. I'm not saying it's not important and change your life. I believe that. But in terms of that monotone, boring narrative that individuals read when it comes to most personal statements, it's really going to not distinguish itself. But however, if you're able to say, I had this event happen in my life and it changed the perspective that I had, and you interpret it in a way that acknowledges you understand this isn't necessarily unique to yourself, but this is how you interpret it, and this is how it's made you different than other individuals or different or deserving of becoming a PA. That to me, if you can get there, if you can articulate that thought, which I help students articulate, that to me tells me, wow, this individual is very, very, very self-aware. They understand that the world doesn't revolve around them. Even in a life-threatening event, they understand that there's hardship, trials and tribulations faced by countless individuals, even those who mean well. But in that understanding, this is their interpretation. That is just one example of what I help students do in being able to interpret what they think is a played out, but very important part of their life into something that they can leverage to distinguish themselves from other individuals using the exact same material, so to speak, the exact same information as other individuals use. Okay. This, I hope, helps you guys out a tremendous amount, even those who have already wrote their personal statement or want to go back and look at their personal statement to see if it fits in. We'll kind of go through this. A lot of it has to do with you just working through it and seeing how it implements or applies to your personal statement. But let's see, you want to start the intro by describing a scene that took place when you realized you wanted to become a PA. So for me, it came, I'll just provide an example. So my father was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes when I was very young. At that period of time, we were we didn't really know, our health literacy was very low. We didn't know if that meant that my dad had terminal illness. We didn't know if that meant that automatically he would start losing limbs, as perhaps comical as it sounds to many of you or some of you. We didn't know that. I researched in my own way. I went to the library and got like this book about freaking diabetes. And I tried explaining that to my dad, and I was youngest in my family at the time, or it's currently still am. And that information, I mean, I don't know if it was medically sound, to be honest, because it was a long time ago, but that changed the perspective of our family. And it almost allowed me to have this sense of empowerment within our family, whose dynamic was very much hierarchical. Father was, the head of the household. That ability to provide medical information and to transform the dynamic of a family and dynamic of even a community was profound to me. That was the beginning when I knew I wanted to get into the medical field. Then you go into your body talking about how, yes, you had this moment, But at the same time, that was just the beginning, right? I didn't know I want to become a PA right then and there. Let's be honest, right? Honesty is key when it comes to your personal statement, but it was the beginning of a journey. And that's the point in the narrative that I like to bring up the most. It's a journey, right? So if I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, individual knows he wants to go into the medical profession, but we're not there yet. Okay, we're starting this journey together. Let's do this, right? So now you set yourself up to talk about those experiences related to the introduction or related to some other aspect of your reasoning or your philosophy for wanting to become a PA. And that's what that third paragraph talks about. Then I know it looks like we jump into conclusion and half of this document's talking about conclusion, but the reality is that journey part is where a lot of the information that is most commonplace in personal statements come into play. And that's okay, but you have to understand we put it in the construct of it being a journey, right? Which is a narrative. So when you lead into a conclusion, you want to pick one thing, one skill, attribute, and that you learned from your journey that also applies to becoming a PA, right? So for example, I talked about being empathetic, I remember. So being empathetic because I understood what it meant to have these hardships and a father being diagnosed with diabetes, living in a culture and family dynamic where we didn't really know what that was. So I developed this form of empathy throughout my journey, right? That's my one thing. Elaborate on conclusion by describing how that one thing also led you to do X, Y, Z. So we talk about these experiences, right, that are very much related to, this is going back to the third paragraph, that are very much related to the intro, right? This is the opportunity for you to brag a little bit about yourself, but to provide a reason why. For example, I think in this section I talked about, I was empathetic, being empathetic was not the reason why, was not the only reason, or let's put it this way, kind of messing up if you can tell, it's not an easy process. So rather than just saying I basically accumulated three years of research, which I did, and then I did 2 years of being a teaching assistant, and what else did I do? I did 3 years of working an internship in the community, in the Bennett County Health Department, doing community outreach. Rather than just saying that, I basically said that those are not necessarily accolades, right? They're not accolades. I don't bring those up to be accolades. I bring those up because I understand the importance of being empathetic and wanting to give back to my community in order to exemplify that, right? So you can basically acknowledge the fact that if I was just to list those things out, right, those accomplishments, which they are accomplishments or accolades, it would seem kind of cringeworthy, right? But if you're able to acknowledge that, and then despite that say, hey, but in fact, this is from the attribute that I developed at a very young age, or from the moment that I wanted, and that I understood I wanted to go into the medical profession, which was then developed throughout my experiences I included up in the body, that to me says, okay, this person is driven, his journey contributed to what he's currently doing now, and then it goes into the conclusion. By resonating with the fact that medicine is an extension of who you are and always has been, rather than an addition, right? If you form this narrative that you want to become a PA or want to become a medical provider, here's your journey, and then you're talking about what that journey taught you and how it applies to the present day, they're going to look back in part of that narrative and be like, wow, this happened early on. This individual has wanted to become a PA from a very long period of time, whether or not he knew it. And that, my friends, is how you form a narrative and create an outstanding personal statement to be able to distinguish yourself from all the narratives that come in that are just very cookie cutter and very monotone. Lastly, this is really the kicker. You want to write about how you can only accomplish your ambitions and mission described to this point through their program. So basically, you presented them with a buffet of things to consider, to chew and digest, right? And it's a strong one because you formed a narrative and it was very concise and straight to the point. Now you're basically saying, listen, this is what I can bring to the table, what I would love to bring to the world, because it's part of who I am. It's not something, it's not like a coat. I don't just put it on whenever I want to. It is me, but I need you to fulfill that in the world. I need you to be able to allow me to implement this and create a better world for the community that I get to serve. That to me is one of the most powerful personal statements you can have. And that's the thing that I help individuals walk through, because it isn't easy. It isn't easy, but this is something that I really love to do and something I'm very good at. Moving on. Supplemental essays and questions. So my opinion on this, or my recommendation, is to always complete these, even if they're optional, right? And you want to use the opportunity to offer more information about yourself. For example, this is just a little bit different, but I was recently talking with a student who had an interview, right? We had worked on his application and he got himself an interview. He we talked about basically asking questions to the panel that would be around him, actually of students currently in the program. And I asked him, like, what questions do you have, right? And he told me, he's like, oh, I have, this question, that question, like, what do you like most about this program? Or what do you like most about the faculty? Fairly straightforward questions that I think all of us would first think of. But I told him, instead of doing that, why don't you do this? I said, why don't you address that question or ask your question by saying, I spent a good amount of time looking at your program. I see that you really value resilience, persistence, and community service. How do you think that that plays a role within everyday activities implemented by this program? You see the difference there? You ask the same type of question, but you reveal information about yourself that this individual did her research into the program, and that's the context for this question. You just gave yourself an advantage by adding information about yourself that may be on your application, may not, that speaks volumes about why you're asking what you're asking. And that's different than, of course, just asking the question. In a similar consideration, whenever you answer a question for supplemental essays or questions in general, reveal information about yourself that gets to the point, but also adds information that they didn't specifically ask for. And in that case, you want to use the mission statement and values in your response. So here's another script. Go figure, right? Like I said, I want to make these things practical for you, because if it isn't, then you can't implement it, and my time was not spent wisely here. So how to maximize a supplemental essay? This is more so in the construct of maybe describing some type of weakness that you've had. So simply identify a strength or weakness in this case in your education or experience, identify values or principles of the respective program. Then you want to link the strength or weakness with the value principle of that program. And then you want to describe how that strength or weakness makes you an ideal applicant, because it actually aligns with their principle or their value. You see, this is just one example again of how you may come to me and say, Junior, I have a C in biochemistry, right? But if you're able to link that C with the reasoning behind why you got that C to the value of the program or principle of the program, and say in reality, you actually exemplified resilience because you came back the following semester and you took that class and you got an A. Instantaneously, you create this vision or impression of yourself that you're more aligned with their principles. And even in your most weakest points of your academic career, you exemplified their mission statement. That to me is dangerous. And it's just one example of how I can help you leverage, or you can leverage, hopefully with this script, a weakness into a strength. Okay, going into phases. This is really something that I love to help individuals with. I always tell people that I can help use their nerves to their advantage, which for many people are like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. He must have some special powers. Not really, it's all up to you. I just provide the groundwork or script for it. Okay, so first and foremost, there's a difference between necessary and unnecessary anxiety and stress, right? Unnecessary anxiety or stress is things that just diminish everything that comes out of your mouth, your thought process. It's the things that include, what happens if a bird flies in here and disrupts my hair? I don't know, something crazy like that, right? Necessary stress is the stress associated with the fact that, this is a huge opportunity. You're very grateful for being there. You have a lot right on this opportunity, right? Getting accepted into a PA program. So one of the ways to try diminishing or lowering the volume of the unnecessary anxiety and stress is to list 3 to 5 worst case scenarios that you can think of on interview day. And then I want you to list just as many responses to each scenario that basically allows you to adapt or prevent that scenario from happening, right? So one example I think I had is that I was worried, and this is comical, but I was worried that if I washed my hands, I would get a whole bunch of water on my pants, right? And that'd be embarrassing because I wouldn't want to have wet pants. So I told myself, okay, well, I can prevent that from happening, or at least respond to it, is by bringing an extra pair of pants, like in the backpack that I brought with me to the interview, right? Did I ever wet my pants? No, I didn't. But at least knowing that I had an extra pair of pants, if that was to happen, allowed me to be much more comfortable with that unnecessary amount of stress. In a similar way, think about the way your body responds to stress and anxiety. In my case, I sweat a lot when I'm stressed or when I'm very anxious. And I was going to Arizona coming from Oregon. So I thought to myself, it's likely going to be 100 degrees in that room. I'm going to be wearing a 3-piece suit. This is literally my worst case scenario, right? So I told myself, okay, well, what's the one way I can respond to that if that was the case? Well, I could always excuse myself. I can have a cold water bottle in my hand, throughout the interview just to keep myself cool. Or I can even put a little like towel or handkerchief in the back of my pocket, in case I did sweat, I can just wipe it off, occasionally. I gave 3 different responses to that way that I respond to stress. And thankfully, I never had to use it. Thankfully, the facility that we were in had air conditioning, surprisingly, right? But at least I knew that I had a response to it. So if it did happen, it wouldn't be disastrous. One thing I also recommend apart from that is ask about the interview structure. So really, don't be afraid of doing this. I did it, and the worst thing they could tell you is like, we can only reveal so much information to you, and that's fine. But any information they reveal to you is probably more than the individual who never asked in the first place, right? Once you figure out this structure, you have an idea whether they're talking to ambassadors from their program, students from their program, a friend that you know from their program, or even to their coordinators, the faculty members. Practice that practice it dressed, and basically go throughout the process of what an ideal interview would be. Visualize that and continue practicing that until your interview. Just some things for Zoom, and I can tell you that I've been messing up on some of these. You want to know what part of your body will be showing first and foremost, right? You have to remember that in an in-person interview, and I tell students this all the time, in an in-person interview, we have the opportunity to basically say a lot with their hand movements, with their legs, with what are nonverbal language, right? Well, in a Zoom, that's basically heightened because all you have is ideally this section to work with, right? So you really have to be cognizant with what you're doing, but at the same time, since we're so tuned in with technology in the current age that we're in, oftentimes we get very bored and we look for things to distract ourselves with. So then we start looking without even thinking about what we're doing while we're in a Zoom session, and you think, well, I do that any other day when I'm talking to family members through FaceTime or any other type of Zoom session. But in this case, it looks like you're distracted and you don't care, which is obviously very, very bad because once again, you only have this part of your body to work with. You also want to acknowledge good responses when appropriate. So when somebody else has a good response, you can nod your head, smile, go figure. Or when you respond to your question, if it is a group interview, you can be like, wow, so-and-so, your response was great, right? And you don't have to go off of their response. You can just say, it was great. The way that I look at it, or the way that I would respond to this question is, and then go from there. And then look at the camera, which is what I have not been doing when you're presenting or when you're talking, because one, it helps you not be so nervous because like looking into a very crowded auditorium, but the lights are dim, you really can't see anybody, right? So you kind of just have your own thoughts. Obviously, I have to look at the screen to see what I'm presenting, but in your case, obviously your thoughts are going to be coming from your response, right? Or your response is going to be coming from your thoughts. And don't look at the screen because once again, it's a little distracting. All right, so responding to questions. The number one objective is to form a narrative, which, right, this isn't anything surprising to you based off of what I've included in the personal statement. You want to form a narrative when you give a response to your question, and we'll kind of go into interpretation of each response that you give, because your job is to make it as easy as possible for the individual who's listening to you to understand what the heck you're saying. Because if there's any misunderstanding, you can't blame yourself. You can't blame anybody but yourself. It is your responsibility to interpret everything you say and say as concisely as possible, which I know sounds extremely daunting, but it's actually very easy to do and it's very empowering if you know you're basically projecting the thoughts that you want the individual to have about your response to them in your response. Kind of weird there, but either way, just hang tight. So you want to repeat the question to begin and your response. So for example, if I was to ask you, hey, why do you want to become a PA? You would say, the reason I want to become a PA is da 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 da. And then you want to end that by saying, and that is why I want to become a PA. Because then I know, as the person who just interviewed you or interviewing you, okay, that individual started and that individual ended. There's no awkward, are you done? Can the other person talk now? And I know, cognitively speaking, that story, that narrative is over. That is something that I need to digest now. And you want to make sure to include a context, response, and outcome to everything you did. Example of this, if I was to ask you, describe a time when you faced an adverse situation and what you learned from it, right? This is one of the things that I always see students make a mistake on. And I'll go into detail about it when it comes to interpretation, but just for the context of this, I would make sure to describe the difficult situation, adverse situation, your response, right? And we'll go into a little bit more detail about what you do for a response, and then the outcome of that, right? When we get nervous, and if we don't think about this framework prior to presenting or prior to responding, we're all over the place. by the time you're done talking, you're like, did I just talk about the outcome? Did I talk about the context? Did I talk about the response? You obviously don't think about it in those terms, but the reason I'm telling you this is because I want you, when you go into an interview, to think about this framework, right? Think about this framework, because if all else fails, right? If you forget everything going into your interview, at least you have a framework to start framing your thoughts. And that is one of the most powerful things, kind of like the response to worst case scenario. If I forget everything, at least I know these 3 things. At least I know I can respond in this way. And oftentimes the way you present information, the narrative, is much more important than actual information, which is kind of mind-boggling if you think about it. Okay, always ask when you're answering a question, not out loud, of course, because you look crazy. Why are they asking me this, right? Why are they asking me this question when they can find this information literally in any type of documents that I gave them, right? How does it apply to being a PA student in their program? Because you're at their program. They don't care if you want to go to another program outside of, not in their institution. You're there for their program. How does it apply to being a PAC from their program, right? Once again, this is where your knowledge of their program makes a difference. All right, so interpretation, looking just at the response I was talking to you about, we'll go back to the example of tell us about a time when you face an adverse situation, what you learned from it. All right, so you want to provide context. You want to describe the response in 3 steps or in steps. So the first thing I did, like I continued by doing, last thing I did, then provide interpretation of response and context. So for example, here's a good, I think I included this in the video once, but if I was to tell you that I helped an individual who was very upset calm down, and that was it, right? That's all I told you. That'd be a terrible response, right? And I've said this before in other platforms. But if I was to tell you that, so helped an individual calm down after he was very upset by first acknowledging that he was upset out loud, trying to understand why he was upset, and then providing him resources to respond to those reasons why he was upset. And in doing so, I came to understand that you can't just judge a patient by their actions or by their words. You have to understand why they're upset in order to treat them empathetically, and how I can use that in the future as a PAC or PAS in your program, right? So that's a huge difference between just providing one response and providing a more concise response with steps. Why is this important? When you give a response, if you think about the psychology of a response, right? When you give a response to somebody, you're hoping that they interpret that information the way that you want them to interpret it, right? Which is the reason why we speak in the first place. However, if in this case, you don't want there to be a misinterpretation, you don't want there to be like, did he really mean that? What was he trying to say with that, right? So what I always recommend individuals to do is to provide that information for the individual, right? Make it easy for the individual to understand what you're saying and why you're saying it, right? So that's why you give them steps, because you have to understand that when I ask you, as an interviewer, when I ask you as an interviewee, describe a time when you face an adverse situation, what you learned from it. Yes, I care about the example you're going to give me. I care about how it applies to being a good, having good bedside manner. But I also care about how your ability to respond to an adverse situation applies to X, applies to Y, applies to Z, right? When you tell me that the way you responded to an upset patient was in these 3 steps, I think to myself as an interviewer, how does that apply to academics? How does it apply to that one situation I know students in my program that I teach always face throughout the clinical year? How does it apply? You see what I'm saying? So you have to understand why they're asking this question and how does it apply to other aspects of the application. And when you give an interpretation that's very concise, one that you do most of the work for them, you find yourself in a situation where they're able to apply that to other contexts. And you, my friend, just maximize that one response in multiple settings by being very concise and forming a narrative. I hope this information isn't necessarily old. I hope it's new information. Students are always very happy to hear this information, so this is why I present it to all of you. Okay, this is just my beautiful creation in terms of being able to deal with your nerves in any given setting. So the first thing I recommend here is to look at 5 principles, the program values, right, which you can easily find on their webpage. The next thing you want to do is note the key terms they use to describe, sorry for that typo, each principle, right, underneath. So you have a principle, then you have the key terms they use to describe it. Now I want you to think of the 5 separate personal examples for each principle, right? So if they were to have a principle of fundraising, right? Think about an example where you fundraised or you helped fundraise or you did something that was very akin to fundraising, right? Then I want you to write an example, just that, write out that experience from beginning to end, how it occurred, how the reason why you're fundraising, what happened when you were fundraising, what you learned from it, right? And go through that. And then use those key terms, writing out that example in perfect form, meaning if you were just cool as a cucumber, you weren't nervous, and you just hit it 110% out of the park, out of the field, what would it sound like? What would it look like? I want you to write that out, right? Don't spend all your day writing it out, but it should be a decent paragraph. Then you want to practice that response nonstop. And this is the thing, individuals, we practice a response in front of a mirror when we're all alone, when nobody else can hear us. That's great, but you're not going to do that in practice. So what I did, and what I recommend individuals to do is practice your response when you're doing things that require your attention elsewhere, right? That when you're exercising, when you're going grocery shopping, when you're riding a bike somewhere, right? Practice your response out loud. You look a little crazy, but do it because that replicates or emulates essentially what you're going to be facing when your mind's distracted as heck and you're trying to focus in on the information that you're trying to talk about. And the fact that you're practicing these 5 examples up to this point is very, very important. Because when we approach interview, one of the common things we want to do is, okay, let's Google search 300 top pre-PA questions or PA interview questions. Then we start thinking about a response for each and every one. That's great, but you're going to spend your time thinking about a response to 3 different responses or 300 different responses to 300 different questions, which let me tell you how much you're going to actually remember when you go into your interview. It's probably about 0% or maybe like 10% tops, right? I'm being generous with that. However, if you think about examples, 5 key examples that happens to have their key terms of the program in it, that happens to be exemplifying one of their values or principles without explicitly saying it, right? And the only thing that makes a difference is your interpretation of that particular experience. You just gave yourself basically a buffet of responses to any question that comes your way. The only thing that matters is your interpretation of it. And once again, we already covered that interpretation component of it, right? This is just a different way of thinking that I fear that resources and community services or community resources out there within our community rather don't talk about often. It's more so cookie cutter template, do this, do that. And you forget the whole perspective and paradigm that if you were to change that, it makes things much easier and you're much more effective. Why this is important. If you follow this, you're going to be nervous still. You're not going to get rid of it, right? But hopefully up to this point, you got rid of the unnecessary nerves, right? So now you only have the necessary nerves, anxiety, stress, whatever. You have that. That's okay, because you don't want to, when you give a response based off an example that you've been practicing that so happens to have the key terms and principles of the program baked into that response, so you don't have to think about it, you're going to mess up. But that's okay, because even if you mess up on 50% of remembering the content that you covered, you're still going to have a pretty damn good response that just so happens to have the principles, the key terms of the program. And they're going to be looking at you across the table, across the screen, and think, wow, this individual is meant to be in our program. This individual has examples of their life that parallel the mission statement of our program. How crazy is that? And you're going to be nervous. So you're going to be maybe shaking, hopefully not sweating like I did. You're going to have a frog in your throat, right? You're going to be like hesitant. And it's going to sound genuine. It needs to be genuine because you're not going to make up the information, right? Like this isn't information you made up. This is information that you prepared for in a strategic way to implement. Just going back to Les's recommendation. There's no rules against this. This is maximizing what you have available to you in order to be the most effective applicant. And let me tell you, you can have all the best grades in the world, and you guys know this. But if you can't articulate your thoughts, if you can't get out of your own head, if you can't bring emotion to the table, you're not going to get accepted. And that's the truth, because practicing medicine, and I've said this and I'll die by this, is an emotional practice. Yes, you can be taught the way to diagnose conditions. You can be diagnosed what therapeutics, what diagnostics to use. And I could talk about that to you today. The thing is, though, that's not going to get you into PA school. What's going to get you into PA school is understanding whether or not you have the foundation necessary to be a provider that is capable of providing empathetic care. And if you can't articulate that on your personal statement, on the impression you receive from the 3 segments, it's going to be very difficult for you, not only if you got accepted throughout the clinical year and then throughout the first year, but it's going to be very difficult to get accepted in the first place. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this. And once again, I'm talking to you without seeing you, which isn't easy, but it's one of the things I'm very good at and being able to teach students how to do on their paper. So let's say you did all that and now you're accepted. This part can go a little bit quicker if it hasn't already been quicker up to this point. I'm not gonna cover that much on this because once again, we're not at this point, but just a little bit of information for you guys, right? All right, so next steps is what the heck do I do before enrolling into PA school, right? Like what do I do, or matriculating rather, starting my program. Guiding principle, do whatever calms your nerves, anxiety, and stress. I kid you not, because I'm a little bit crazy if you haven't like seen this already or interpreted this from me already. I studied everything just because I wanted to study and I love to study. And also I wanted to create a schedule, which we'll get to in just one moment. But people ask me, how'd you do that like 3 months out from the start of your program and not get burned out? I'm like, because I did what made me less anxious and less stressed. I felt more confident doing that because I felt confident starting the program. And other individuals could have done that or fulfilled that same criteria by traveling to Italy, which some of my counterparts did, right? It's all up to you what calms your stress. It's plain and simple. Don't let anybody tell you anything different. If they do, you can give them my email and they can talk to me, okay? It can be overwhelming, but you can take a vacation, spend time with family, study, sleep. For me, it was studying, a little bit sleeping, I'm a little bit crazy. So 1 month schedule, kind of a little layout for you guys is all belongings should be moved in your new place within 1 month or 1 month from the start of the program. Practice daily school schedule and make sure to let your loved ones know and friends know that you're going to be practicing your schedule, which means that you may not be as easily accessible as before. This is very important because this is one of the biggest obstacles you have to face when you actually start the program, talking from experience. Study some content, anatomy in my recommendation, during this mock schedule, and reach out to current students and ask questions. Some programs have mentorship programs baked into their curriculum already. We can talk to individuals who are currently in the PA program, but if not, be proactive and initiate this conversation by contacting the individuals who let you know that you were accepted in the first place. Then implement and practice something stress-reducing activity. I did meditation, which is, I think, perfect for the stress reducing. I use the app Headspace, but obviously there's a ton of apps out there and you don't even have to use an app. You can just, find some time to calm your thoughts on your own before starting the day. So just a general structure, you guys probably already know this, maybe you don't, hopefully this provides some insight. This is pertinent to my program, anywhere from 2 to 3 years. Mine was 26 months, just over 2 years. And systems-based module, right? You go over various sections, which I think is pretty commonplace and also something that my program implemented. Exam and assignments, this is, really what causes the fear of goodness in everybody. Exams usually are at the end of each system, but there are sometimes midterms. One particular example of this is cardiology. For us, cardiology was 12 weeks or 8 weeks. Usually we had about 4 to 6 weeks on average for each block. Cardiology for us is about 12 weeks, and so we had a midterm, and then we had a final as well, and it was extremely stressful, but I meditated. So we used Exam Master, and basically the way that we split it up is that we had different type of exam. So for example, we had clinical exam, and then we had a science-based exam, which covered things like pharm and anatomy. So our clinical-based exam is what you probably have, if you guys are a long time, or if you tuned in on previous Zoom sessions, you probably saw like those case studies, right? That's essentially what we worked through in the clinical part, the vignettes. What do you do if this person comes in, happens to be this age, has this risk factors, also has this comorbidities? What do you treat them? What do you order? What do you image, right? Pretty stress inducing. And then you have your science base, which is more so probably what you're familiar with coming up to this point, and that's like anatomy. What drug, what's the side effect of lisinopril, right? Right, cough is one, in case you've ever asked that. So skills and application is exactly what it sounds like. So we had, classroom portion, and then we had more of a skills portion, right? Where we practice foreign body, we practice venipuncture, practice everything you could think about, splinting, anything you think about, any skills that you have seen PAs do, this is where we practice it at. And I want to tell you that this is a really quick turnaround. I remember specifically that we learned venipuncture on mannequins, right, in the morning. And then it was so comical because it's one of the first things we learned. Then my instructor told us that, okay, you're gonna have lunch, and then when you come back, we're gonna do it on each other, and you're gonna be tested and passed off on it, right? So pass or fail. that just blew my mind. I was like, welcome to the big leagues. This is what a PA school is about, right? It's not for everybody, but if you got to this point, implementing what I had suggested up to this point, you're gonna find yourself very much ready for it. And thankfully, well, not thankfully, I have a lot of veins, and so everybody wanted to use me as basically a pincushion, and it was very bloody. But that's a different story. So SPE, simulated patient encounters, and OSCEs. The difference between this, and maybe your program may do it differently in the future. OSCEs are basically opening a door into a particular room and then being presented a part of a case, right? So a patient comes in with very high glucose. What do you want to do, right? You want to test their urine is one thing you can do in that case. An SPE, simulated patient encounter, is that we hire an actor, the program hires an actor, you walk in and you basically go through the entire presentation, the entire patient encounter. So you do the HPI, right? Then you want to go into diagnostics. You want to go into therapeutics, patient education, and then you leave that room, and then you go into doing your SOAP note, basically your documentation for that patient, right? This is stuff that I'm sure you've been exposed to. If not, perhaps I can do a little bit more in detail presentation on that a little later. But I know you guys have a lot of good presenters in store for you. Okay, studying, just general tips. Maybe nothing new to you, but like I said, touching a little bit brief on this, find programs and resources that work for you. And at the end of the day, get ready to change your study habit, because I did. I love flashcards, but sometimes I had used tables pertinent to the diseases or pathologies that we were studying at the time. Find a study group if this is what you want. People would tell you, listen, study groups are the best. They help you synthesize information. I heard that, and all I heard was like zero, because that didn't work for me. I needed to work for myself, and that worked very well for me. So do what you think makes you most comfortable. That's what matters at the end of the day. Be careful with joining the hype train or rumor mill, which makes me laugh, because you have to remember, those who are listening to me are probably type A, like type A minus, maybe type B plus type of personalities, right? And it's very easy to get stressed, very easy to get amped up in all the wrong ways. And sometimes when you have a room full of people, in this case, it's probably a little bit different, because you're not going to be in a room necessarily for your PA program if you're accepted in the near future because of COVID. There's always going to be the sense of drama and sense of anticipation, right? You may go into this phlebotomy session thinking, oh, I got this. But then you talk to your friends that are freaking out in the bathroom, like crying, nonstop. And you're like, should I be nervous? Like, what am I doing wrong? Like, am I not ready for this? Did I not prepare for this, right? So try avoiding that to the best of your ability, because it kind of goes down to that bottom point. PA school is 80% mental. I remember talking to one of my best PA friends in school, and I told him, and we talked to each other, like, honestly, PA school is mental. And it's just a matter of, because they understand that you have to learn a lot very quickly, and you have to learn on your feet very quickly and act on your feet very quickly, which is awesome if you're able to do it, right? And you will be able to do it even if you don't think you can at the current moment now, right? But for that reason, they place you in situations that are naturally stress-inducing to allow you to get comfortable with making those tough decisions when it counts the most. So keep that in mind always. But for a little plug, always implement some type of meditation or exercise, something to relieve stress, because that's why this is important. Let's see. So remember, for the clinical year, high probability of being employed where you rotate. Example is what I'm doing currently right now. Make connections no matter what, more than just passing rotations. So once again, you need to befriend individuals, and this kind of goes back to my philosophy on creating connections. You will always need your network, and it's good to start that early on than later, for obvious reasons. You want to befriend providers, and more importantly, medical assistants. I'm sure there are medical assistants listening to this right now. If that is the case, I appreciate everything you do, because medical assistants are freaking amazing. And as students, you're going to need them. They oftentimes know the information that you need to look like a really good student. And you have to thank them, buy them Starbucks, buy them whatever they want, besides that car, right? Buy them things that you think, because they are your best friends. And a lot of the medical assistants I created friendships with throughout my year in this area, that I'm currently practicing in, they're still my friends now. I still say hi to them on a daily basis, and it's just an awesome feeling. Be personable. This is kind of just my motto for anything. Be personable, smile, don't shake hands, maybe elbow bump. Counts more than your clinical knowledge. This goes down to the bottom portion of this, that your evaluation, whether or not you pass a rotation, is dependent on your end of rotation exam, like 10% on clinical assignments, and then mostly 40% to 50% is based off of your preceptor's evaluation of you, which essentially means that if your preceptor doesn't like you, although although you're good, you've done well, clinically speaking, you're still going to receive a subpar grade, which I know isn't the best part of the world. And maybe it's not necessarily how it works for every situation. I don't want to generalize there, overgeneralize, but it's to say it benefits you just to be personable, even if you don't like your preceptor, okay? It's not going to be a perfect world, but be personable. It always benefits you, believe me. Exams and evaluation. So maybe they've covered this already, but if not, this is information you definitely should know. We have inter-rotation exams at the end of every clinical rotation, right? So for example, if I had women's health, which I did, at the end of those 6 weeks, right, the average time that we had for each rotation, sometimes it could be as short as 4 weeks, depending on your program. We had a 120 question exam. Now you may think, oh my goodness, I could clear this exam. Am I going to continue to go to PA school? Well, the grade that you receive back is based off of national average. Typically, if you receive 400 or above or below, a little bit, depending on the standard deviation for that exam and national average, you pass, right? So sometimes you receive like 400 and you're like, I don't know if this is good. It's not 1,000. So like, did I fail? As long as you receive 400, you're typically in a good position. Once again, preceptor evaluation counts more than end of rotation exam. But if you do fail your end of rotation exam, you do have to retake it again. And if you fail that, you have to retake it again, but you have to also do the rotation all over again. It doesn't happen often, didn't happen at all in my class. One thing I want to note that if you fail an exam in the first year, in the classroom year, usually you can retake it again. Our program had like a 3-strike rule, basically to see if there's an upward trend in exam averages or exam grades. And if there isn't, then you would need to basically leave the program because you're not performing as you should to be on par with the outcome of the program. You may be asking, Junior, how many students left your program? We had about 5. Which I'm not really sure the attrition rates in other programs, but for me, it was fairly noticeable because we only had about 11 guys, myself included, in the PA program, and most of those individuals who left, I think, it was like 3-2 in terms of guys leaving the program. So it was definitely noticeable on my end because I was like, there's less guys around here, what the heck, but no biggie, for me at least. Okay. This is kind of going into the meat and potatoes of what I'm currently at, something just for you guys can see in terms of we're talking some money, right? Which is always something very interesting, and just things to consider for future employment. Like I said, maybe not as applicable, but I hope it's something that you're curious about because you have to start thinking about this today. Okay. Make sure you have, these are 5 tips that I actually received from a colleague of mine who's also a practicing physician, and she helps individuals work on contracts, employment contracts, and new opportunities as a new provider. So make sure you have room to grow in clinical knowledge. And you can also apply this to your patient care experience job as well, except obviously the salary. Get compensated based on the AAPA salary. Consider mentorship opportunities with and without supervising doc. Consider the role current employment plays in future employment. Look for a schedule that offers work-life balance you want. And employer should start you slowly in terms of seeing patients. You shouldn't start seeing as many patients as you're going to be seeing 3 years down the road on your first day. AAPA, if you're not a member of that already, they offer student membership prices. I think it's like less than $200, which I know is a lot, but still consider it because it's going to be very impactful, both on your resume and for you knowledge-wise. And you get the actual annual report for free, not for free technically, but if you're a student. Otherwise, it's $200 out of pocket just to buy it, which I don't get that money. Anyway, clinical knowledge, practice around, this is applicable to my current experiences, right? So right now I practice around countless providers in various fields. Predominantly, this is pediatrics, family medicine, and women's health. So the location I'm currently practicing is the same location I did a lot of my clinical rotations at, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to work at this one facility, because I was able to work with at least 3 preceptors of the 6 I received in the entire year. I received 2 other rotations, but they were in different facilities and different organizations. Those included the rotations I had providers that are also alongside me at this facility is pediatrics, family medicine, and women's health. And I practice family medicine, but can you see how women's health is also very important and pediatrics is very important when it comes to practicing family medicine? So I always seek their expertise more than my supervising physician. The way that works at my facility is that you have supervising physicians, but basically just on paper that they're connected with. Sometimes they can rotate. And the reality is you may not necessarily, I'm actually not next to my supervising physician, nor do they have to be on the premise, right? It's more so just that I'm able to talk to the individuals around me to get their expertise, which vary anywhere from DOs to MDs to NPs and PAs. Imagine that. These are individuals I have around me to help me learn on the job, guys, right? So you don't need to know everything when you graduate from school, and you don't need to know everything when you start school either. So I watch and learn also how to do various procedures, because some PAs, which are very, very, very well utilized in my facility that I'm at for doing procedures, are more than welcoming to have me learn those things from them. And once you learn how to do them, since they're already on your responsibilities or part of your jurisdiction or scope of practice, you're able to do them as soon as you feel comfortable doing it, which is pretty crazy, right? You think, well, is there a training I need to do for this officially? For the next on inserts, yes, in that case, but in like nail removals, obviously, what else do they do? Joint injections, like knee injections, shoulder injections, those things you can start implementing as soon as you feel comfortable doing so, which is kind of crazy, right? But once again, quick learning. Location, I completed my clinical rotations, also something I've had good connections with. So this is why I recommend, if you're going to be going somewhere to do your clinical rotations, even if it's not a place you're planning to stay at for a long period of time, it's something that you should definitely consider if you're planning to work thereafter, and start making those connections early on. Therefore, they understand my clinical knowledge because they've seen me as a student, basically grow as a student. And also, I'm very extremely independent because of the location that we work with. I was somewhat underserved for a variety of reasons. I don't want to go into the politics of it, but really, we don't have many specialists around us. So me as a provider at 27 years old, being a PA, I need to be able to basically reason through this and determine whether or not they need a specialty, whether or not they need emergency services, what can I do as a first line, second line, so on and so forth. And it's a lot, guys. It's a lot, but you'll be surprised at how well prepared you are to do it once you get to that point, and you have good support system behind you if you so wish. All right, so compensation, average salary for AAPA, average salary is about 110K. I'm getting paid currently 120K from where I'm currently at, which for me is more than enough money than I ever really need, to be honest with you. And then influential factors to this, it's obviously there's so many factors that plays a role. And maybe some of you know this better than I do, right? But location, cost of living in the Central Valley, it's actually the cost of living is perhaps high in comparison to other locations around the country, obviously, but it's also much lower than many of the other locations here in California, which I guess can't say that much. Specialty makes a difference, right? Given the area that I'm practicing, family medicine usually isn't compensated as one of the highest paid specialties, but given the area that I'm practicing, the responsibilities that we have, that's how much we're being compensated, which of course is above the average for most PAs. Experience also, to be honest, I don't know why I put that there. Experience in terms of like what type of experience are you going to be getting in this position? Taxes is a big one. It's like 40% here in California. So try doing the math on that one. But to be honest, it's like 30% other locations. So still at the end, you're kind of earning more. You're still getting more money, right? Incentives and CME. So our program has a lot of incentives. My facility has a lot of incentives. For example, the CME, it gives you about like $2,000 to basically utilize for your continuing medical education credits, and it gives you a week off, right? You have incentives for the amount of patients you see, the quality metrics that you meet. So basically $120,000 is your base salary, but you can fluctuate, 10K from there. All right, so mentorship. I'm just going to be going over this really quickly here because I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Benefit to have completed my rotations where I currently work. Many of my preceptors mentor me with managing patient load and flow, tough cases, money management, procedures, and general clinical knowledge, as I have already stated. And it's really a community providers with the common mission statement. And guys, I have to tell you, it's a pretty great feeling. It's a really great feeling to be working next to people who have the same mission statement, understand that the circumstances that we're practicing in are not ideal, both the COVID and the geographical setting that we're practicing in. But regardless, we practice and we help our patients to the best of our ability. And it's okay not to know everything, especially as a new provider going onward. And it's okay to not know everything when it cocomes to being a pre-PA student, right? I've been there, and that's why I present this information to you completely free. And that's me. That is my way of giving back to the next generation of providers, not necessarily age-wise, but also age-wise, but more so the generation that wants to become a PA thereafter me. And that's my mission statement. This is why I do what I do. Schedule, 40-hour work weeks, plus or minus an hour and a half, just because I, document. I'm not the quickest at documentation, but I also review my patients for the day. I think about differential diagnosis, so basically what can be causing this chief complaint. Somebody comes in for a cough, I think to myself, what can be causing it? Can it be COVID? Can it be sinus congestion? Can it be upper respiratory infection? Can it be gout? Those are just the things that pop into my head when I start thinking about what can cause cough. And then when I talk to the patient, of course, I try delineating that information to be like, okay, it's gout. It happens at night. He has acid reflux, omeprazole, right? Which is PPI, and also behavioral change. All right, I should be talking about that. That sounds fun. Okay, work one Saturday per month, usually 8 to 5. One shift every week is about 12 to 9. For me, it's Tuesday. And then 9 to 6 otherwise, right? But I get there at 8 and I leave on average 6:30. Right now, what I love about my facility and job is that they're ramping me up. So right now I'm seeing about 14 patients, then 24, then 30. We're federally funded community health center, right? So one thing I've heard, not really experienced, is that if you go into more of a private practice, the patients you see, apart from having maybe a different set of comorbidities, you see less of them throughout the day and you have more time to work with them. For us, it's really seeing a lot of patients in a given period of time. And we have comorbidities talking about chronic kidney disease, heart disease, hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism, poor behavioral choices, decisions in terms of like eating, causing diabetes. I saw an A1C. If you guys know what A1C, I'm sure you do, basically indicator of sugar within a 3-month period of time, kind of gives an indication of how well someone's managing their diabetes. You think, okay, maybe 10. I've seen somebody with about 13.6 I'm actually currently working with right now. So try managing that, right? What are we going to do to treat them with that? These are the type of patients that we're working with. And these are the type of patients that I want because they're challenging, right? They're challenging. And that's, I think, what medicine is, because despite it being challenging, you always want to put a smile on your face, be personable, and be able to tap in that emotional intelligence and be empathetic. Future employment. Initially, I wanted to go into emergency medicine because I didn't know anything about it. Throughout my clinical rotations and practices, I really wanted to go into family medicine. I loved it. I loved the environment, I loved the people I was working with. Much of family medicine is also urgent care based because we have individuals on a walk-in basis that come in with things stuck in their hands, stuck in other locations. You can think of that. And so we kind of have to decipher through that. Had a patient come in who had acute chest pain only on inspiration, try how to rule out a PE, rule out COVID, rule out pneumonia. These are things that you kind of have to decipher through very quickly. Of course, making sure that they don't have COVID and infecting others. So keep that in mind. Kind of just a little bit more high stress, but that's mixed in every now and then, even within my first year practicing. Focused on target population of interest. Once again, individuals who have a lot of comorbidities, but they mean well, they love well. I mean, they develop their community extraordinarily. These are people that I really want to help, right? And I want to create these communities. And low repayment consideration, going back to money. This is my last slide. I'm not sure. We'll see. The loan repayment. So I'm also, since in a federally funded program and there's underserved location around me, I'm available. I'm eligible, to apply into the loan repayment program, which basically after 2 years pays you $50,000 of your loan off of your medical loan, and even loans depending on how you consolidated them or not in your undergrad as well, which for me is a very real thing since it came straight out of undergrad. And then also after the third year, they pay you $25,000, and I think the fourth year it's $10K until your loan's paid off, which is actually pretty sweet, guys. And it doesn't include your base salary, it doesn't include those incentives, doesn't include that continuing medical education credit that I talked about earlier. So really working in a community like this, providing quality care, loving the people you're working with, trying to develop your ties and communications within this community. You're really talking about, getting paid a considerable amount of money. And I know it's not all about money, but I know that some part of this decision is about money. And so that's why I'm being very transparent with you guys with how much I make and how much your potential is, which is, it's obviously a lot. All right, this is me wearing the exact same shirt. Funny how that works. And then if you have any questions, ask me right now, we'll address them. Otherwise, you can email me. You can also Instagram me. I think that's how the cool kids say it. Look me up on Instagram on Limitless PA Lifestyle. And then roadmap. I'm going to show that really quick, guys. Won't go into detail about it. Let's see here. Can I do this? Oh man, I feel like. All right, share. All right, so this is the roadmap that I created for you all, for you guys, sticking with me and listening to me talking really quickly and developing a raspy voice. So this is order of importance. So basically the first thing, like what's presented first is something that I would definitely work on before moving on to the next. So getting good grades, identify patient care related jobs, reach out to local providers, befriend science-based providers, look for community outreach events, find research apprenticeships, join a pre-PA club at your school, explore Caspa, research your dream PA programs, and boom, there's my ugly mug again. But the point is that this basically makes everything that I talked about much more concise, much more practical. End of the day, if you forget everything that I just said, I'm totally cool with it. Just know how to implement these things, and that you can't escape because I gave you the scripts and literally the roadmap to do it. And I'm here for you guys. Just reach out to me. And that's it. Stop sharing.
Yes. Oh my gosh, we're so blown away. Thank you so much for your time. That was such an amazing presentation. You gave so many helpful tips, and the scripts as well, the roadmap, all of that's so incredible. So thank you so much for your time and all of that.
Yeah, man, seriously, we're honored. That was a lot of raw, really good information. Like, everybody here is so lucky. Very
Super.
applicable, not only pre-PA, but just in real life as well. We can tell that you put a lot of heart and soul into this. So that is very, very amazing info.
It's all about making it practical, right? Because I think that sometimes it's very easy to talk theoretically and like, oh, my experiences, but my goal is to just give you guys, develop that opportunity for yourself, right? Because that's more impactful than me saying, oh, I have this opportunity for you, right?
Yeah, yeah, and we totally see that you did that perfectly. We highly recommend going back and watching this anytime. I know myself, I'm going to be looking at this quite a bit, not just for the scripts, but all of the information that you gave was so good.
Cool.
But yeah, on that note, we did accumulate quite a few really good questions. If you don't mind, just go ahead and go.
Let's do it.
Okay, perfect. So just taking off the top, what's your opinion on post-baccalaureate classes and retaking classes to improve GPA?
So I definitely think you should retake classes if your grade is anything below a B, first and foremost. But you have to be very careful with where you take your classes at, or you don't have to be very careful, but one thing I would consider is that just take it where you took it initially, right? Or if you took it at, if you completed a course within a university and you go to community college, you have to have a good reason as to why that is. However, if you completed a course in community college and then you decided to take it in the university, it's a little bit different. Or if you retook a course at community college that you initially completed at community college, that's okay as well. Post-bac, I think is a good way of increasing your GPA, but I also know that individuals do like a kind of a DIY post-bac, and I think that's just as appropriate rather than adding more loans to, or more money or loans to, or going in more debt. I think creating your own curriculum that's more applicable to the PA programs you want to apply to is something that you should definitely do if you're in that position. And also think about it, if you have a particular class that, you know, that you think is kind of an eyesore in terms of you got a C in biochemistry, which I did. And if that's the only thing holding you back from applying this year, please don't think that you have to redo, you know, throw out the baby with the kitchen sink, so to speak, just to get into that program. Maybe that program isn't one that you have to apply to necessarily this cycle, but also if you can provide a justification or rationale behind that particular grade, then like I said, you can easily turn that weakness into a strength using the script that I provided you guys.
Awesome, thank you. So let's see, somebody else is asking, is graduating early seen as a good or a bad thing for PA schools?
Good question. I would say it looks like a good thing if you did well in school. If you didn't do well in school and if you left some stones unturned in that sense, then it's not going to look like a good thing. I like to think of being an undergrad as like a bonus round, right? For example, students sometimes ask me, Junior, if I go into, if I start my gap year, or should I wait until my gap year or should I do so-and-so during my undergrad? And I'm like, listen, once you get into your gap year, you're expected to bend over backward in the sense of documentation to try to get into PA school. This means you're expected to work 40 hours a week. You're expected to really bust your behind to get into PA school. Whereas an undergrad, we understand, individuals looking at your interview understand that you have a lot going on your plate. So if you're able to manage this, able to manage that, able to manage this in undergrad, it's going to elevate it much more than individual, let's say, took that gap year and decided to do part-time and that's it, right? If you're able to do part-time in undergrad, I'm like, wow, this individual knows how to manage their time. They know how to still do well in their undergrad education. And then they graduated early, get out of here. Like, that's crazy, right?
Awesome. So next question we have is, for letters of recommendation, do you recommend having one from a professor directly, or is that something you can bypass?
If the program that you're applying to request you to have a professor, then I would include it. I think I remember when I applied, I don't know if it was specification of Caspa or the program that I was applying to have a letter of recommendation from a professor. So I did. I think going back to this perspective, right, of who you are as an applicant, when you think of yourself in terms of personal experiences, personal statement, and letters of recommendation, you have to ask yourself, even within a letter of recommendation, what impression are you giving? If all you have is providers and they're saying the exact same thing about you, then really all you really have in those 3 letters of recommendation is one letter of recommendation, right? Or really high credibility for that one trait or that one experience they're saying that you're really good at. So if you bring in a professor that can also talk about your ability to handle stress, your ability to do well in a difficult course, that's going to be applicable to your time, your next 2 years within this program, if they so wish to accept you, which is why I mentioned, think about your application as an ideal overall impression formed on those 3 categories. And even in your case, since you're asking this question, those letters of recommendation, right? What do those 3 letters of recommendation are going to tell about me? Are they saying the exact same thing from the exact same source? Or they're saying different things that are also applicable to my time at this PA program if they accept me.
Awesome.
So to answer that question, yes, you get a professor, especially a science-based professor, if they know you very well.
Perfect. Somebody would like to know, what do you think should be the maximum time gap between taking a class with a professor and asking them for a letter of recommendation?
That's a good question. As much as you're comfortable with, right? As much as you're comfortable with. And think about it this way. When I make my decisions, I think to myself, what would 9 out of 10 people decide in this situation, right? And I ask myself, how much of a benefit is this going to be to me if I decide to do what 9 out of 10 people are not doing? In this case, this question, if you think to yourself, it's been 3 years since I talked to my anatomy and physiology professor, right? If I was to compare 10 of my friends, 9 of them would probably not contact them in the next, and would not contact them, try rekindling what the experiences you had with them, right? But if the benefit of getting that letter of recommendation or connecting with an individual is very much, is very impactful to your overall application, then I would say, you know what, although everybody else is going to be doing that, I'm going to decide to contact the individual. So to answer your question, I just provide justification for my response. Contact the individual, even if it's 5 years out. I have no shame in that. And it all comes down to how you do it, right? So if you can remember what you learned in their class or something that was impactful, it's actually applicable, and you're not just pulling it out of thin air, then I would definitely say contact them. But use that script that I provided, because that's gonna fill in a lot of the gaps in terms of like, who is this person? Should I respond back to them, type of thing.
Awesome, that's a great answer. So somebody's asking, when adding HCE or PCE for different jobs with similar responsibilities, should we repeat those responsibilities separately for each job, or is having it there once enough? So I guess on Caspa.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure if I completely understand that question, but it reminds me of a general question. And I think this is what that question's asking, but it does get kind of confusing, even the questions pertinent to that topic. So what I usually suggest individuals to do, first and foremost, if you think you have 500 hours of patient care experience, right? And then you also think you have, within that 500 hours, you also have healthcare experience, right? Within the same 500 hours, you cannot say you have 500 hours of patient care experience and 500 hours of healthcare experience from the same position. It is your responsibility to delineate how many hours of those 500 hours you had in that position is attributable to patient care and attributable to healthcare. For example, I was a cardiopulmonary assistant. Let's say I had 100 hours as a cardiopulmonary assistant, right? I can't say, well, I did healthcare experience and patient care experience responsibilities in this job. So that means I did 100 hours of patient care and 100 hours of healthcare, all underneath the umbrella of the patient care or a cardiopulmonary assistant. I have to go back, which is why it's so important to look into Caspa now and to see how they ask this information. And then I have to basically divide the amount of hours, let's say 50 hours I did in healthcare experience and 50 hours I did in patient care experience. And then you can put those in two different entries, but you have to make sure that you denote one's for healthcare, one's for patient care. And it's okay if you have the same position, so long as there's a delineation between the two and the hours are not repeated, right? Because then that would basically be cheating in that case. I hope that answers the question. If not, please ask me again, or ask me to clarify.
Yeah, that was a great point. Thank you for making that distinction. That's also something that's kind of hazy for me. It's kind of one of those weird things that Caspa has on there.
Yeah.
But let's see. Sophia's asking, is it true that you're viewed as more competitive if you submit early, even if it's a non-rolling admissions program?
No, I don't know. In that case, it's just going to be a matter of you submit. They say they don't really look at your application. I have every reason to believe that they don't. I think my program, ATSU, does not do run admission. I don't remember clearly, but at least when I applied to it, they didn't. And so it's not like I know for a fact now, talking to my faculty, especially the lead of the admissions committee that makes these big decisions, talking with her, she does not look at the applications any sooner than the deadline stated. So in that case, I wouldn't stress too much about getting your application in, but you have to remember, and maybe this individual who asked this question already knows this, but there's processing time when you submit your application in Caspa when it's actually received by the program, right? Which is usually around 4 weeks. So you have to keep that in mind, that some programs say you can submit it with Caspa by this deadline, or it has to be in her hands by this deadline. And if it has to be in her hands by this deadline, that means that you have to take it upon yourself to submit it in Caspa early enough where the processing time gets your application there in their hands on their deadline, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's a very good point. Yeah. So kind of piggybacking off that question, someone asking, in the case that it is a rolling application cycle, rolling admission cycle, would you recommend delaying your application in order to get more PCE, or applying earlier with less PCE?
That's a good question. Applying earlier with the PCE. Well, think about it this way. How is the risk to benefit ratio, right? So first and foremost, you have to ask yourself, how many patient care experience hours do you have already? And within the time that you're planning to delay, are you planning to accumulate an astronomical amount of patient care experience hours that justifies you waiting and perhaps losing that opportunity, that seat, right? So if, for example, if you are in a patient care experience job that only gives you 50 hours per week of hours, right, that are documented worthy, and you have to wait, or you're contemplating submitting now or waiting several weeks in order to accumulate more hours, and you know that at most you're gonna get about 250 hours, but you're already at a patient care experience base that's around like 1,000, let's say 1,500 hours, and it's like well over the preference or requirement for the PA program, then I would just submit it. I'm very much the individual who, even if you think you don't have a chance, submit it either way. But if you really think that you're going to be able to accumulate like 200, 300 hours by the end of it, like near the middle or end of the application cycle, because it's run admissions for that program, then yes, I would wait in that case. But it's really just, if that individual wants to reach out to me and we can just look at, the makeup of what experiences they have already, please do so either on Instagram or my Gmail, because that's a very tough situation to just generalize a response to.
Thank you so much for that
Thank you.
opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to take you up on that myself, just because you're so awesome. But let's see.
Someone would like to know, would it be okay to use an internship that they did in high school?
Depends what the internship was pertinent to. If it's something medical related, I usually say my general rule of thumb is to not include anything after high school, because the thought process is that you ideally want to be a competitive applicant where the most impactful experiences you've accumulated is within college onward, right? So the thought process is, if you're planning to, if the benefit you're trying to receive from using that healthcare or the high school experience is trying to meet some type of criteria that should have been met elsewhere within your undergraduate education, then that's not going to be as impactful as you think it's going to be. And I would say, no, don't use it. Rather get that experience now rather than using experiences in the past. If you just think that the high school experience is going to add more, I guess, more credibility to you, then I also would not include it there. I'd be very careful though. I wouldn't include high school experience other than maybe just like an award or accomplishment denomination in terms of patient care or in terms of Caspa. I would not include that as like hours. I would not include that as patient care experience. I would not include that as healthcare experience. Ideally, you're going to have enough experience that you've accumulated from the start, your freshman year of undergrad or sophomore year in undergrad onward, that you don't need that and you should not use that.
Perfect. Good point. That's a commonly asked question. So thank you for addressing that.
No worries.
Let's see. Does it matter on your Caspa if you use a personal email or school email?
It does not matter. Just know whatever email you use is the email they're going to contact you to let you know that you've received a letter of an interview letter or you've been accepted. Oftentimes I see students are worried that they're looking everywhere, like on their Caspa application. Am I receiving a notification from Caspa or is it through my email? They contact you through your email. So check the email that you use. Doesn't matter if it's Gmail, doesn't matter if it's your academic one. In either case, just make sure it's not going to your spam folder, which I think is pretty fundamental at this point in all of your careers.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I know you've kind of touched on this, but someone would like to know if they have a low GPA, how would you recommend acknowledging that in your personal statement? They said they've heard a lot of advice about acknowledging their weaknesses in personal statements.
They've heard a lot of advice with that? Okay. So what I would recommend is that you can acknowledge your weakness, but you have to have an underlying theme behind it, right? And ideally, it's important to include a theme that's very much aligned with the mission statement of the program you're applying to, or aligned to becoming a physician assistant, right? The only stipulation I have to this is if you have like a 2.7 GPA or 2.8 GPA, and you're hoping that by somehow acknowledging your weaknesses or somehow acknowledging you have a low GPA, they're gonna decrease the minimum requirement for the GPA. That's not going to work. You're going to get denied. It's going to be a waste of money. However, if you have like a 3.1 GPA, there's a variety of things that you can do in terms of talking up your experiences, right? One of the more common things I have, which isn't necessarily related to GPA, but perhaps something that you can apply to your GPA, individuals tell me that they have very low patient care experience hours, right? But they have a lot of healthcare experience hours. And they're worried that programs are going to nitpick the heck out of their low patient care experience hours. Well, I tell them you have to look at it very differently. Right now, you're thinking that patient care experience hours is the crux or the backbone of being a PA. When in reality, that's not true. What is true is that PAs are very versatile, and so much of their work is out within the community. So if you come to me and tell me you have a crap ton of patient healthcare experience hours, I'm going to tell you that you're more well-equipped to become a PA than an individual who has 10,000 patient care experience hours. And you can say as much within your interview. So my point is that I have to look at your current situation, but generally speaking, there's a variety of different ways that you can approach that. For example, if you're to tell me I have a low GPA, but in the first several years, I kind of went over my head in doing patient care or community healthcare or community experience hours, then I would approach it similarly and saying, well, in fact, yes, you may have a low GPA, but you still understand the content, the curriculum. And on top of that, you were so eager to be involved within the community that you threw yourself head in first. And while it was a mistake, you learned a lot about it and you wouldn't want to replace those experiences because you understand a physician assistant is not just an individual who's in a four-roomed wall practicing medicine. They're individuals who are out in the community and you're a person of action. You see, so just like that, I'm able to twist that weakness that you consider having in your low GPA into something that's actually going to look fairly marketable and leverage in your favor.
That is so impressive, man. That's awesome.
That's what I do for the students I work with. And I love it because there's so many different ways of leveraging your guys' opportunities. And I never want one of you guys to think that, oh man, I'm at such a disadvantage, because it's just not true. It's just not true. And I hope people learn that it isn't.
Oh, I hope that people take away your optimistic attitude, because it's such a, anxiety inducing like process that this whole thing is.
Exactly.
You're incredible. But let's see, somebody's asking, is it easy to switch specialties between the field once you're already a working PA?
Yes, it is. The only things you have to consider is the fact that you may experience a pay cut and obviously whatever is associated with the benefits of working where you're currently at. For example, putting it into my perspective, my current experiences, one of the benefits of working at the facility that I'm working at now is that I get to work with a variety of very complicated patients, but also patients who aren't that complicated. But we're talking about very complicated. Like I mentioned earlier, chronic kidney disease, high diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes, heart disease, where one particular treatment and medication means that you have to take into consideration the GFR, basically their glomerular filtration rate of their kidneys, right? You have to make sure that they're going to be okay at the end of the day. That's very complicated that not everybody gets initially. as a first year PA, or not everybody wants to get as a first year PA, right? But the benefit of that is that ideally you're marketable to deal with the most difficult patients, medically speaking, difficult patients at other venues, and you're able to utilize resources basically out of thin air, which I really want. My impression of a physician assistant has always been to be like a Swiss Army knife, where you can jump into a situation and you can help in any way, and you can make things happen just out of thin air, right? However, if I was to go somewhere else, although that skill and those attributes I've developed throughout this period of time, practicing in this type of environment and having those responsibilities in jurisdiction and scope of practice would benefit me tenfold. The reality is that it may be in a location, for example, let's say I go to San Diego, right? That's different than obviously Central Valley, California, where I currently practice. And the cost of living is going to be much higher. And also the cost, the compensation that they give me will probably be much lower, because they understand that there's a variety, a saturation of providers out there in that particular area. And so you have to take those two things in consideration. Otherwise, the point that I brought up, the attributes and skills that I'm learning right now in family medicine, is to say that those are applicable as the foundation to learn in any other specialty, right? If you know the basics, then you can own in on the specifics of any given pathology, which is why I always recommend individuals go into primary care. However, if you go into emergency medicine straight out of the gate, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's kind of equivalent to family medicine in terms of providing you with applicable skills. Perhaps the transition will be a little bit different, both in the speed of the medicine that you're practicing, context, as I've already mentioned, the monetary gain from that. But just keep that in mind, that it depends the specialty that you're going into. That's why I like to go into family medicine first, because then I can determine and decide for myself if it's something that I want to do in the future. And obviously, one of the benefits of being a provider, a physician assistant in particular, as you guys already know, is that much of your experience is hands-on, right? As I mentioned in my presentation, if there's a procedure that I want to do that doesn't require some type of licensure to do it, outside of what I already have as a license, then I can do it as so long as I know how to do it. I feel confident, and obviously I keep the patient's safety in check. One other thing related to this is that despite what specialty you go into, when you have to retake your PANCE, which is called the PANRE, and PANCE is the certification exam you have to take. It's about 360 questions. Either way, you are responsible for knowing everything. So let's say you were in neurology for the past 10 years, because each licensing is a 10-year increment, so you have to take the exam in 10 years. Even if you're in neurology, you have to know everything. You have to know everything. Like, you're responsible for knowing things about pediatrics, even if you don't see pediatric patients. You're responsible for knowing things about women's health, even if you don't know anything about women's health. So one of the benefits of going to primary care, if you catch my drift, is that you always know that information, and you're also very, very marketable, depending on your patient population, to go any specialty that you want, because you're that much quicker at learning skills on the job that's pertinent to the specialty. I know there's a lot, but hopefully this recording, so then you can slow it down a little bit. I don't know.
Right. Definitely. Thank you. How are we doing on time? Are we doing okay on time? Is it okay if we ask a few more questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So someone would like to know, this is a good one. How do we get involved with your mentorship program?
Oh, that's a great question. So right now, the mentorship program that I have, it's called PASC, which, to be honest with you guys, I forgot what it stands for, but it's pretty sweet. Essentially what it does is it's a 7-month program. It's founded basically on the fundamental principles that is pertinent to applying. So basically talking about Caspa, GRE, PA-CAT, talking about personal statements, interviews, where I walk individuals through this process in a more detailed approach through monthly Zoom meetings. On top of this, I also have, because I'm really good at connecting with people and coordinating initiatives, I contacted PAs within the area that are willing to provide mentorship, basically, and be a sounding board for many of the students enrolled in the program. And so I pair them with these mentors to basically answer any questions they have along the way, and also develop a Google Classroom with the help of a good friend of mine, to basically help to guide individuals throughout that process in terms of what they should be doing midway through the month and what they should be doing for the second half of the month or monthly meeting. That right now is basically that program right now is closed. Right now it has like 60 students in it, which for one man is definitely a lot to handle in terms of how much care and effort I put into that. But apart from that, if you do want guidance, whoever asked that question, and want insight, you can just email me or follow me on Instagram and DM me on Instagram, and I'm willing to help you. I'm very much a person who likes to talk to people over the phone and through Zoom rather than texting, because I find that that's the most impact. That's the greatest way I can provide the biggest impact. So it's easy for me to just say, hey, let's talk during lunch, or hey, let's talk, I'm driving somewhere, let's talk about it, let's talk about your situation. But really look out for that program opening up again after April. And right now I did it through a particular program I'm working with individuals who are considered underserved or from underserved locations. But probably the next cycle, and it'll be a little bit more refined and concise, with the connections already made and benefiting those who are asking now, that will be available on Instagram. I think I'm going to open it up a little bit more, and obviously it'll be a little bit more competitive at that point. But hey, if you come to me and you say, hey, Junior, I remember that one time you talked on this presentation. I like this aspect. I implemented it since last time. I really hope I could get into your program. Lo and behold, I'm gonna be like, this person listened, and yeah, why not? I'll give you a green light to join the program.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, thank you so much for that opportunity. Like, everybody here is so lucky. I can't stress it enough.
I want to, my mission for those who are still listening is to usher in a new form of providing help to the next generation, because I've done my research on what's currently going on, and there's nothing wrong with it, but a lot of it's very highly priced, and it's for individuals who can benefit from it the most, and the individuals we need in medicine, it's very unattainable. And I find that to be unjustifiable, because as PAs, we make a lot of money, and there should never be a reason to make money off of the next generation. So my goal is to really just provide free content and a community and sense of belonging that individuals can really benefit from, and it doesn't have to have a price tag that's outrageous.
Oh,
That's
man.
incredible. That's
Yeah. Not to bash anybody else, but that's a very humble mindset that you have. I really appreciate it. So maybe 2 more questions, if that's okay with you.
Sure, yeah, no worries.
Perfect. So this is a good one. Someone is asking, if a PA school does not require the GRE, and maybe we can also associate Casper or PCAT. Yep. Yeah. So should you take it anyways to be seen as competitive?
No, you shouldn't. And I don't include any more information. I include information. I would not, to answer that question shortly, no, don't include the GRE. There's no need to do it. But in the one instance where there is obviously need to do it is if it's requirement. But I'd also distinguish, it's kind of people sometimes worry about focusing on one thing at a time. I look at how much effort things are going to require and whether or not I'm able to do well in that thing while doing other things simultaneously. The reason I bring that up is because let's say a program is asking you for the GRE and you have to take the GRE. If they're just asking you, they just want to do it as a prerequisite, right? And it's not on a competitive basis, meaning they won't compare your GRE grade to the other student, which most likely is not going, most likely they don't do that. But let's say they don't do it, right? And so all you have to do is just do the GRE, and they're not going to perform it on a competitive basis. Then I would try taking care of that, obviously within the deadline of the program, but I wouldn't let that be the deciding factor whether or not applying to that program, because you have to think to yourself, because you're thinking to yourself, oh, I need to study like 6 months for it. No, you don't. Unless that GRE is going to be compared to other applicants where the grade or the score that you're going to receive in the GRE is going to help distinguish you from other PA students, then of course, then that's a different situation you have to spend time with. And that just kind of goes back to the sum zero of that is that if they're not asking for it, don't give them that information. There's no information, there's no reason you should give that information at all. And I think I want to say the same goes with my philosophy is if they don't ask for the MCAT and you happen to take the MCAT, don't provide that information. Because best believe if I was looking at that, I'd be like, why'd you take the MCAT? And then you're going to have to provide justification for that. And perhaps if it's part of your narrative and you developed a damn good response as to why you took the MCAT and why you're sitting in front of them doing this interview for PA school, then by all means, throw it in there. But going back to unnecessary stress, unnecessary information, unnecessary problems, don't create unnecessary things for yourself in the application.
That's a great response. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think this one is a good one to wrap it up on. Sure. Kind of food for thought, but it says they're asking about your opinion on the future of PA. So if you have opinions on like oversaturation, how the salary will go, if the role will change, anything like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that there's an opportunity for the PA profession to become oversaturated. However, I don't necessarily think that's going to be anytime soon. I think that there's a reason why the PA profession is highly sought after. I forget the specifics, but I believe looking at some statistics that the PA profession's the third best job in the country and the second best healthcare job behind orthodontics. I'm not sure, maybe one of you can cite me on that, but the point is that there's a lot of reasons behind becoming a PA that's not measurable in terms of how much you're being compensated on an annual basis, right? So there's a lot of reasons for people who want to be a part of it. I know some of the grief with coming, or the complaints coming with the PA CAT and things like Caspa, things like GRE, in terms of creating more obstacles to apply to PA programs. I know there's a lot of that out there right now, but you have to remember that that actually is a good thing if you're able to understand the process and you're able to do well, which is an obstacle I understand all on its own, but you have to keep that perspective in mind, because that is being implemented for a reason. It's being implemented because to prevent the oversaturation of the PA field. And so if you can do well, you earn your spot into a PA program, and you know that you made that cut to get into that opportunity. I think that PAs are always going to be needed. And I think as we continue to grow, you'll notice this even in the state of California, that supervising physicians are still going to be there. And let's not make any bars about it, that as a mid-level provider, and some people may become offended with the mid-level provider term, I never really get too caught up in terms, because that's not the reason why you practice medicine, right? If you start getting into the politics of things, unless you're trying to create change, which is always a good thing, but just to create drama, that's not why you practice medicine. But what I'm trying to say is that there are amazing people out there lobbying for PAs to be able to practice to their full capacity. Here within the setting that I'm practicing, I have that wonderful opportunity just because it's out of necessity. And other locations are not like that. However, there are people lobbying for us to be able to practice with more freedom, but still understand the need to be able to talk with their peers. Because apart from just being a PA, we're medical providers, and it doesn't matter who you are, you're always going to have a difficult case that comes in. You're not going to know what to do, and you need to be able to consult your other providers. And creating any type of apprehension or angst between the two, I think will be detrimental to the patient's health. So there's never this, I know there's conversation out there that it's MDs versus PAs, or it's da-da-da versus da-da-da-da. Nothing like that. The minute you start falling into that trap is a minute that the patient's health is becoming compromised, and we can't have that, personally speaking. But there's always a need to work with one another. And for that reason, I don't think the PAs are ever going to go out of style, so to speak. I think it's going to continue to grow, and we should embrace the extra requirements, so much so that it allows us to keep the PA profession very lucrative and very effective for the patients, because we don't want anybody to become PAs. And it's one of the things that I recommended, or I reminded my counterparts in PA school, is that this is very freaking hard, right? I use a different word than freaking at the time, but it's very freaking hard. And you have to learn quickly, and it's very stressful at times. But do you want it any other way? You have 2 years to learn how to provide exceptional care to patients. Sometimes the patient's lives are in your hand, whether you want it to be or not, whether you put yourself in that position or not. Do you want it any other way? Do you want it to be easy? Do you want the path that you're currently experiencing as pre-PA students to be easy? Do you want that to be easy? Because if it was easy, then as cliche as all of our mothers have told us, or caregivers have told us, then everybody would be doing it. But that's the reality of it. And when you're standing across from the patient providing exceptional care, you want to know that you fought tooth and nail to be there, and you know what you're doing, that it just wasn't given to everybody. And that's a confidence boost that you can continue working towards. And so I hope, as a last note, I hope you guys remember that it isn't supposed to be easy. The struggle is very real. And when you get to this point that I'm currently at, let me tell you, it's very much worth it. And because I know how much it sucked to be in your position and how great it feels to be in this position, that's my motivating factor to get you guys here to this point.
All right, Junior. I couldn't think of any better way to conclude that. That was inspirational, everything, man. It was so good.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm happy. Thank you guys for the wonderful opportunity. I love talking, as you guys can tell. And, I hope you guys can join me and usher in a new generation of what it means to be providers and giving back.
Oh, thank you. We can't rave about you enough. You're so well spoken. Nobody would ever guess that you just finished PA school. It seems like you've been practicing forever. You're like the most wise doctor out there. You're truly an older soul than you are.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, we wish you the absolute best, man. You're just such a genuine person, and you know, one in a million. Not a lot of people are out there like you, especially once they finish the whole thing. Like going through school, being pre-PA, it's easy to do this kind of stuff because we're in this position. We understand what people are going through, but you've already made it. This is your chance to focus on you, and the fact that you're not forgetting where you came from means so much. So really, really thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you guys for your time, and thank you for those who stayed on and continue listening. And hope happy to hear feedback. Happy to hear or see you guys contact me, follow me on Instagram, whatever. I have a podcast also that I'm a little slow on. It's called the Limitless PA Lifestyle. I interview individuals who are doing amazing things like myself outside of medicine, and yeah, just gain inspiration and insight for everybody who cares to listen. So keep stay tuned for that, and yeah, I'm here for you guys.
Definitely, we'll make sure to share your Instagram, your email,
and your podcast as well.
For sure.
Is it okay with you if we send out the PowerPoint slides to the people that joined as well as the guide? And
for sure, yeah, I think
okay.
it's necessary. It has so much valuable information, for sure.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, and so last thing I can think of, just kind of wrap it up. I know you were very focused on giving your presentation, and that totally came through because it was amazing. But just in case you didn't have a chance to look back at the chat, there was so much support. Everybody loved you. Like, you know, it just constant thank yous, constant compliments, everything. You know, everybody really loved this. It was an amazing session.
Everybody is super appreciative of everything that you've said, everything you've given, your time, everything. They really, really love it.
No worries. That's what I'm here for. It's what it's all about.
All right, perfect. Well,
Jamie,
thank you again.
Yeah.
We hope you have a great day, man. Thank you so much.
Same to you guys. Have fun.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Take care.
Okay, everybody, that was a really good session. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and put the quiz out right now in the chat. That will include, when you get your certificate, it will include the PowerPoint slides from today, as well as the guide that he was talking about. So really good, really good information. We do recommend, if you have a chance to go back, or if you want to re-watch that video, it's going to be here on our YouTube. There's so much good information there. We'll provide you again with Lewis's Instagram as well as his email, but it should be on the slides just in case. But yeah, guys, I think that's everything. Thank you so much.
We really appreciate you joining us today, and hopefully, I mean, it definitely seems like hopefully most of you learned a lot, and it was super informative. So like you said, we definitely recommend going back and looking at this video and the slides that we'll send out in the guide.
Yeah, but okay, guys, we'll be hanging out in the chat. If you have any more questions, any technical details, or anything you want to say, just let us know. We'll be hanging out right here for a few more minutes, okay?
Oh, and just one more thing. The quiz, we did send out the link for the quiz, and same thing as always, as long as you get 4 out of 5 correct, you'll get the certificate. We'll email that out within a week, but we're usually quicker, about 1 to 2 days. But yeah, 4 out of 5 correct, and you'll get the certificate.
All right. Thank you again, guys. Take care. We hope you have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.